Angry shouts rose up there. A dozen or more rough-clad fellows carrying spears and pitchforks were trying to force their way over the chest-high stone wall of a goat pen, while a handful of men within tried to keep them out. Several horses ran loose inside, frightened at the noise and dodging about, and there were 3 women mounted. They were not simply waiting to see how it would all turn out, though. One of the women appeared to be hurling rocks, and even as he looked, another dashed close to the wall to lash out with a long cudgel, while the third reared her horse, and a tall fellow toppled back off the wall to get clear of flashing hooves. But there were too many attackers, too much wall to defend. "I advise you to ride wide," Sion had said. Idara and Navarin turned grim stares at her, but she plowed on, hurry overwhelming her matter-of-fact tone. "Those are surely the Prophet's men, and killing his people is a bad way to begin. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands may die if you fail with him. Is it worth risking that to save a handful?" Perrin did not intend to kill anyone if he could help it, but he did not intend to look the other way either. He wasted no time in explanations, though. "Can you frighten them?" he asked Idara. "Just frighten?" He remembered all too well what the Wise Ones had done at Demise Wells. And the Ashaman. Maybe as well Grady and Nield were not there. "Perhaps," Idara replied, studying the crowd around the pen. She half shook her head, shrugged a fraction. "Perhaps." That would have to be good enough. "Aram, Furin, Terrell," he snapped. "With me!" He dug in his heels, and as Stepper leaped forward, he was relieved to see the warders following closely. 4 men charging made a better show than 2. He kept his hands on the reins, away from his axe. He was not so pleased when Fail galloped Swallow up alongside him. He opened his mouth, and she arched an eyebrow at him. Her black hair was beautiful, streaming in the wind of their rush. She was beautiful. An arched eyebrow? No more. He changed what he had been about to say. "Guard my back," he told her. Smiling, she produced a dagger from somewhere. With all the blades she carried hidden away, sometimes he wondered how he missed being stabbed just trying to hug her. As soon as she looked ahead again, he gestured frantically to Aram, trying to keep the motion where she could not see. Aram nodded, but he was leaning forward, sword bared, ready to skewer the first of the Prophet's folk he reached. Perrin hoped the man understood he was to guard Fail's back, and the rest of her, if they actually came to grips with those fellows. None of the ruffians had noticed them yet. Perrin shouted, but they seemed not to hear over their own yelling. A man in a coat too big for him managed to scramble atop the wall, and 2 others appeared about to get over. If the Wise Ones were going to do anything, it was past. A thunderclap nearly over their heads almost deafened Perrin, a mountainous crack that made Stepper stumble before regaining his pace. The attackers certainly noticed that, staggering and looking around wildly, some clapping hands over their ears. The man on the wall overbalanced and fell off outside. He leaped up immediately, though, angrily gesturing to the enclosure, and some of his companions leaped back at it. Others saw Perrin then, and pointed, their mouths working, but still no one ran. A few hefted weapons. Suddenly a horizontal wheel of fire appeared above the goat pen, as wide as a man was tall, flinging off sputtering tufts of flame as it spun with a moan that rose and fell, mournful groan to keening wail and back. The rough-clad men broke in every direction like scattering quail. For a moment longer, the man in the too big coat waved his arms and shouted at them. Then with one last glance at the fiery wheel, he too darted away. Perrin almost laughed. He would not have to kill anyone. And he would not have to worry about Fail getting a pitchfork through her ribs. Apparently the people in the pen were as frightened as those outside. One of them, at least. The woman who had reared her horse at the attackers slipped open the gate and kicked her mount to an awkward gallop. Up the road, away from Perrin and the others. "Wait!" Perrin shouted. "We won't harm you!" Whether she heard or not, she kept whipping her reins. A bundle tied behind her saddle bounced wildly. Those men might be running as hard as they could now, but if she went off by herself, even 2 or 3 could do her injury. Lying flat on Stepper's neck, Perrin dug in his heels, and the dun shot forward like an arrow. He was a big man, yet Stepper had earned his name for more than prancing feet. Besides, by its lumbering run, the woman's mount was hardly fit for a saddle. With every stride, Stepper closed the gap, nearer nearer, until Perrin was able to reach out and seize the other horse's bridle. Up close, her hammer-nosed bay was little better than crowbait, lathered and worn out more than the short run could account for. Slowly, he drew both horses to a halt. "Forgive me if I frightened you, mistress," he said. "Truly, I mean you no harm." For the second time that day, an apology did not get the response he expected. Angry blue eyes glared at him from a face surrounded by long red-gold curls, a face as regal as any queen's for all that it was plastered with sweat and dust. Her dress was plain wool, travel-stained, and as dusty as her cheeks, but her face was furious as well as queenly. "I do not need," she began in chill tones, trying to jerk her horse free, then cut off as another of the women, white-haired and bony, galloped up on a slab-sided brown mare in worse condition than the bay. They had been riding hard for some time, these folk. The older woman was just as worn and dust-covered as the younger. She alternated between beaming at Perrin and scowling at the woman whose bridle he still held. "Thank you, my lord." Her voice, thin but strong, gave a hitch as she noticed his eyes, but golden yellow eyes on a man slowed her only an instant. Not a woman fazed by much. She still carried the stout stick she had been using for a weapon. "A most timely rescue. Megden, whatever were you thinking? You could have gotten yourself killed. And the rest of us, too. She's a headstrong girl, my lord. Always leaping before she looks. Remember, child, a fool abandons friends and gives up silver for shiny brass. We do thank you, my lord, and Megden will, too, when she comes to her senses." Megden, a good 10 years older than Perrin, could only be called a girl in comparison to the older woman, but despite weary grimaces that matched her scent, frustration tinged with anger, she accepted the tirade, only pulling once more in a half-hearted attempt to free her horse, then giving up. Letting her hands rest on her cantle, she frowned at Perrin accusingly, then blinked. The yellow eyes again. Yet despite that strangeness, she still did not smell afraid. The old woman did, but Perrin did not think it was of him. Another of Megden's companions, an unshaven man mounted on yet another bedraggled horse, this a knob-kneed gray, approached while the old woman was talking, but kept back. He was tall as Perrin, if not nearly so wide, in a travel-worn dark coat with a sword belted over. Like the women, he had a bundle tied on behind his saddle. That tiny breeze swirled to bring Perrin his scent. He was not afraid, he was wary. And if the way he looked at Megden was any guide, it was she he was wary of. Maybe this was not so simple as rescuing travelers from a gang of ruffians after all. "Perhaps you should all come to my camp," Perrin said, finally releasing the bridle. "You'll be safe from brigands there." He half expected Megden to make a break for the nearest tree line, but she turned her horse with his, back toward the goat pen. She smelled resigned. Even so, she said, "I thank you for the offer, but we must continue our journey." "We will go on, Lenny," she added firmly, and the older woman frowned at her so sternly that he wondered whether they were mother and daughter despite her use of the woman's name. They certainly looked nothing alike. Lenny was narrow-faced and parchment-skinned, all sinew, while Megden might be beautiful under that dust, if a man liked fair hair. Perrin glanced over his shoulder at the man trailing after, a hard-looking fellow in need of a razor. Perhaps he liked fair hair. Perhaps he liked it too much. Men had made trouble for themselves as well as others for that reason before this. Ahead, Fail was sitting swallow and peering over the wall of the pen at the people inside. Perhaps one of them had been hurt. Seonid and the Wise Ones were nowhere in sight. Aram had understood, apparently. He was close to Fail, though looking impatiently toward Perrin. The danger was clearly past, though. Before Perrin was halfway to the goat pen, Terrell appeared with a narrow-eyed, stubble-cheeked man stumbling along beside his roan, the collar of his coat gripped in the warder's fist. "I thought we should catch one of them," Terrell said with a hard grin. "Always best to hear both sides. Whatever you thought you saw, my old Da always said." Perrin was surprised. He had thought Terrell could not think beyond the end of his sword. Even hiked up as it was, the stubble-cheeked fellow's frayed coat was plainly too big for him. Perrin doubted anyone else had been able to see well enough at the distance, but he recognized that thrusting nose, too. This man had been the last to run, and he was not cowed now, either. His sneer took them all in. "You're all in deep muck for this," he rasped. "We was doing the prophet's bidding, we was. The prophet says if a man bothers a woman as doesn't want him, he dies. This lot was chasing after her." He jerked his chin at Magden. "And she was running hard. The prophet'll have your ears for this." He spat for emphasis. "That is ridiculous," Magden announced in a clear voice. "These people are my friends." This man completely misunderstood what he saw. Perrin nodded, and if she thought he was agreeing with her, all well and good. But putting what this fellow said alongside what Linny had, not simple at all. Fail and the others joined them, followed by the rest of Magden's traveling companions, 3 more men, and another woman, all leading worn-down horses with few miles left in them. Not that they had been prime horseflesh in some years, if ever. A finer collection of buck-knees, bow-backs, spavins, and swaybacks Perrin could not recall. As always, his gaze went first to Fail. His nostrils strained for her scent, but Seonid snagged his eyes. Slumped in her saddle, flushing scarlet, she wore a sullen glower, and her face looked odd, her cheeks puffed out and her mouth not quite closed. There was something, a bit of red and blue. Perrin blinked. Unless he was seeing things, she had a wadded-up scarf stuffed into her mouth. Apparently, when wise ones told an apprentice to be quiet, even an Aes Sedai apprentice, they meant it. He was not the only one with sharp eyes. Magden's mouth fell open when she saw Seonid, and she gave him a long, considering look as if he were responsible for the scarf. So she knew an Aes Sedai on sight, did she? Uncommon for the countrywoman she appeared. She did not sound one, though. Buren, riding behind Seonid, wore a thunderhead for a face, but it was Terrell who made everything even less simple by tossing something to the ground. "I found this behind him," he said, "where he might have dropped it, running." At first, Perrin did not know what he was looking at. A long loop of rawhide thickly strung with what appeared to be tags of shriveled leather. Then he did know, and his teeth bared in a snarl. "The prophet would have our ears, you said." The stubble-cheeked man stopped gaping at Seonid and licked his lips. That was Harry's work," he protested. "Harry's a mean one. He likes to keep count, take trophies, and he, Shrugging in his captive coat, he sank in on himself like a cornered dog. "You can't tie that to me. The prophet will hang you if you touch me. He's hanged nobles before, fine lords and ladies. I walk in the light of the blessed Lord Dragon." Perrin walked a step or to the man, careful to keep the Dun's hooves clear of the thing on the ground. He wanted nothing less than to have the fellow's scent in his nose, but he bent down, putting his face closer. Sour sweat warred with fear, panic, a tinge of anger. A pity he could not sniff out guilt. Might have dropped was not had dropped. Close-set eyes widened, and the man pressed back against Terrell's gelding. Yellow eyes had their uses. "If I could tie that to you, you'd hang from the nearest tree,"
how you doing?
he growled. The fellow blinked, began to brighten as he understood what that meant, but Perrin gave him no time to regain his bluster. "I am Perrin Ibarra, and your precious Lord Dragon sent me here. You spread the word. He sent me, and if I find a man with trophies, he hangs. And if I find a man burning a farm, he hangs. If one of you looks at me cross-eyed, he hangs. And you can tell Mustima I said so too."
I just woke up from a nap.
Disgusted, Perrin straightened. "Let him go. If he isn't out of my sight in 2 shakes." Terrell's hand opened, and the fellow dashed off at a dead run for the nearest trees, never so much as glancing back. Part of Perrin's disgust was for himself. Threatening. If one of them looked at him cross-eyed? But if the nameless man had not cut off ears himself, he had watched it and done nothing. Fail was smiling, pride shining through the sweat on her face. Her look washed away some of Perrin's revulsion. He would walk barefoot through fire for that look. Not everyone approved, of course. Seonid's eyes were squeezed shut, and her gloved fists quivered on her reins, as though she desperately wanted to yank that scarf from her mouth and tell him what she thought. He could guess, anyway. Idara and Navarin had gathered their shawls around them and were eyeing him darkly. Oh, yes, he could guess. I thought it was to be all secrecy, Terrell said casually, watching the stubble-cheeked man run. I thought Masima wasn't to know you were here till you spoke in his pink ear. That had been the plan. Rand had suggested it as a precaution. Seonid and Missouri had insisted on it every chance they got. After all, prophet of the Lord Dragon or no, Masima might not want to come face-to-face with someone Rand sent, considering the things he was said to have allowed. Those ears were not the worst, if the 10th part of rumor was to be believed. Idara and the other wise ones saw Masima as a possible enemy, to be ambushed before he could set his own trap. I'm supposed to stop that, Perrin said, gesturing angrily to the rawhide string on the ground. He had heard the rumors and done nothing. Now he had seen. I might as well start now. And if Masima decided he was an enemy, how many thousands followed the prophet, out of belief or fear? It did not matter. It stops, Terrell. It stops. The Mirandian nodded slowly, eyeing Perrin as though seeing him for the first time. My Lord Perrin, Megden said. He had forgotten all about her and her friends. The others had gathered with her a way off, most still afoot. There were 3 men aside from the fellow who had followed Megden, and 2 of those were hiding behind their horses. Linny appeared the wariest of all, eyes focused on him worriedly. She had her horse close to Megden's and seemed ready to seize the bridle herself. Not to stop the younger woman bolting, but to bolt herself and take Megden with her. Megden herself appeared completely at ease, but she also studied Perrin. Little wonder, after all that talk of the prophet and the dragon reborn on top of his eyes. Not to mention an Aes Sedai gagged. He expected her to say that they wanted to go now, immediately. But what she said instead was, we will accept your kind offer. A day or 2 resting in your camp might be just the thing. As you say, Mistress Megden, he said slowly. Masking his surprise was difficult, especially since he had just recognized the 2 men trying to keep their horses between them and him. Taveran work to bring them here? A strange twist in any case. It might be just the thing at that. Chapter 8. A Simple Country Woman. The camp lay about a league farther on, well back from the road among low wooded hills, just beyond a stream that was 10 paces width of stones and only 5 of water, never deeper than a man's knees. Tiny green and silver fish darted away from the horses' hooves. Casual passers-by were unlikely to come on them here. The nearest inhabited farm was over a mile away, and Perrin had checked personally to make sure those folk took their animals to water elsewhere. He truly had been trying to avoid notice as much as possible, traveling by back roads and the smallest country paths when they could not keep to the forests. A futile effort, really. The horses could be pastured wherever there was grass, but they required at least some grain, and even a small army had to buy food, and a lot of it. Every man needed 4 pounds a day in flour and beans and meat. Rumors must have been floating all over Gillidan, though with luck no one suspected who they were. Perrin grimaced. Perhaps they had not, until he went and opened his mouth. Still, he would have done nothing differently. It was 3 camps, really, close to one another and none far from the stream. They traveled together, all following him, obeying him, supposedly. But there were too many personalities involved, and no one was entirely sure the others aimed at the same goal. Some 900 or so winged guards had their cook fires crowded between rows of picketed horses in a broad meadow of trampled brown grass. He tried to close his nose to the mingled smells of horses, sweat, dung, and boiling goat meat, an unpleasant combination on a hot day. A dozen mounted sentries rode a slow circuit in pairs, their long, red-streamered lances all at precisely the same angle, but the rest of the Mayenners had shed breastplates and helmets. Coatless and often shirtless in the sun, they lay sprawled in their blankets or diced as they waited on the food. Some looked up as Perrin passed, a number straightened from what they were doing to study the additions to his party, but none came running, so the patrols were still out. Small patrols, without lances, who could see without being seen. Well, that was the hope. It had been. A handful of Gaishain moved at various chores among the wise ones, low gray-brown tents on the sparsely wooded crest of the hill above the Mayenners. At this distance, the white-robed figures appeared harmless, eyes downcast and meek. Up close, they would look the same, but most were Shido. The wise ones claimed Gaishain were Gaishain. Perrin did not trust any Shido out of his sight. Off to one side on the slope, beneath draggled sour gum, perhaps a dozen maidens in cotton sword knelt in a circle around Sulin, the toughest of them, despite her white hair. She had sent out scouts too, women who could move as fast afoot as the Mayenners on their horses, and were much more likely to escape unwanted attention. None of the wise ones up there were in the open, but a slender woman stirring a large stew kettle straightened, knuckling her back as she watched Perrin and the others pass. A woman in a green silk riding dress. He could see the glare on Masuri's face. Aes Sedai did not stir kettles, nor perform 20 other tasks the wise ones had her and Seonid doing. Masuri laid it at Rand's feet, but he was not here, and Perrin was. Given half a chance, she would peel his hide for him. Idara and Navarin turned up that way, even in those bulky skirts barely disturbing the layers of dead leaves that carpeted the ground. Seonid followed, her cheeks still bulging around that scarf. She twisted in her saddle, peering back at Perrin. If he could have believed in Aes Sedai looking anxious, that was what he would have called her. Riding behind her, Furin and Terrell wore scowls. Masuri saw them coming and hastily bent back to the black kettle, stirring with renewed vigor, trying to make out that she had never stopped. So long as Masuri stayed in the Wise One's charge, Perrin thought he did not have to worry about his hide. The Wise Ones seemed to keep a very short leash. Navarin looked back over her shoulder at him, another of those dark stares he'd been getting from her and Dara, since sending his warning, his threat, by the stubble-cheeked fellow. Perrin exhaled in exasperation. He did not have to worry about his pelt unless the Wise Ones decided they wanted it. Too many personalities, too many goals. Megden rode at Fail's side, seemingly paying no attention to what they passed, but he would not have wagered a split copper on it. Her eyes had widened a hair at sight of the Mayenner sentries. She knew what red breastplates and helmets like rimmed pots meant, as surely as she had recognized an Aes Sedai face. Most people would not have known either, especially not folk dressed as she was. She was a mystery, this Megden. For some reason, she seemed vaguely familiar. Linian Talonvor, that was what he had heard Megden call the fellow who had ridden after her. Young Talonvor, though there could not have been more than 4 or 5 years between them, if that, stayed as close behind Megden as possible, with Aram in the way, trying to heal Perrin. So did a little stick of a fellow with a pursed mouth called Bolwer, who seemed to pay less heed to their surroundings than Megden pretended. Even so, Perrin thought Bolwer saw more than she did. He could not say why precisely, but the few times he had caught the bony little man's scent, he had been minded of a wolf testing the air. Strangely, there was no fear in Bolwer, only quickly suppressed ridges of irritation shot through with the quivery smell of impatience. The remainder of Megden's companions trailed along well back. The third woman, Brianna, was whispering fiercely to a hulking fellow who kept his eyes down and sometimes nodded silently, sometimes shook his head. A shoulder striker in street talk, if ever there was one, but the short woman had an edge of toughness about her, too. The last man sheltered behind those two, a stout man with a battered straw hat pulled low to hide his face. On him, the sword the men all wore looked as strange as it did on Balwar. The third part of the camp, spread out among the trees just around the curve of the hill from the Mayenners, covered as much ground as the winged guards, though it held far fewer people. Here, the horses were picketed well away from the cook fires, so the unblemished smell of dinner filled the air. Roasting goat, this time, and hard turnips the farmers probably had intended to feed to their pigs, even with times as hard as they were. Close on to 300 Two Rivers men who had followed Perrin away from home were tending meat on spits, mending clothes, checking over arrows and bows, all scattered in haphazard clumps of 5 or 6 friends around a fire. Nearly every one of them waved and shouted greetings, though there was too much of Lord Perrin and Perrin Golden Eyes to suit him. Fail had a right to the titles they gave her. Grady and Niald, unsweating in their night-black coats, did not cheer. Standing beside the cook fire they had built a little away from everyone else, they merely looked at him. Expectant looks, he thought. Expecting what? That was the question he always asked himself about them. The Ashaman made him uneasy, more than Aes Sedai or wise ones. Women channeling the power was natural, if not exactly anything a man could be comfortable around. Plain-faced Grady appeared a farmer despite his coat and sword, and Niald a popinjay with curled mustaches. Yet Perrin could not forget what they were, what they had done at Dumai's Wells. But then he had been there too. Light help him he had. Pulling his hand from the axe at his belt, he dismounted. Servants, men and women from Lord Dobrain's estates in Carrion, came running from the lines where the horses were picketed to take their mounts. None stood taller than Perrin's shoulder. Country-clad folk, forever bowing and curtsying obsequiously. Fail said he just upset them when he tried to make them stop, or at least not bob around him so often. In truth, that was how they smelled when he did, and they always went back to bobbing in an hour or two. Others, nearly as many as the Two Rivers men, were working with the horses or around the long rows of high-wheeled carts that hauled all their supplies. A few were darting in and out of a large red and white tent. As usual, that tent made Perrin grunt gloomily. Berylane had a larger one back in the Mayenner part of the camp, plus one for her 2 maids and another for the pair of thief-catchers she had insisted on bringing. Anura had a tent of her own, and Galien as well, but only he and Fail possessed one here. For himself, he would have slept under the sky like the other men from home. They had nothing over them at night but a blanket. There was certainly no fear of rain. The Carrienan servants bedded down beneath the carts. He could not ask Fail to do that, though, not when Berylane had a tent. If only he could have left Berylane in Carrion. But then the breeze had picked up a trifle, though it was still too warm. He thought he heard that thunder again, faint in the west. The flags unfolded in slow waves, collapsed of their own weight, rippled open again. Out in the open again, despite his order. Perhaps he had stopped trying to hide after a fashion, but what was now Ghealdan had been part of Manetheren. Alejandro would not be soothed by hearing of that banner. He managed a pleasant face and a smile for the stocky little woman who curtsied deeply and took Stepper away, but it was a near thing. Lord, remember who you are, and don't let your tongue land you in hotter water. If this young lord was at odds or gaze, well, everyone knows she's dead, and it's none of your affair in any event. Now apologize before he grows angry.
I am working on a hot spot, so
Megden stared at Lenny,
that might be a
her
lot of
mouth working,
problem.
even more startled than Perrin. Again, she surprised him, though. Instead of erupting at the white-haired woman, she slowly drew herself up, shoulders squared, and looked him in the eye. Lenny is entirely right. I have no right to speak to you so, Lord Ebara. I apologize, humbly, and I ask your pardon. Humble? Her jaw was stubborn, her tone proud enough for an Aes Sedai, and her sense said she was ready to chew a hole in something. You have it, Perrin said hastily, which did not seem to placate her one bit. She smiled, and maybe she intended gratitude, but he could hear her teeth grinding. Were women all crazy? They are hot and dirty, husband, Fail said, putting a hand in at last. And the
Yeah,
last few
we're
hours
back.
have been trying for them, I know. Aram can show the men where to clean themselves.
The joys of
I will
working
take the
out with a
women with
hot
me.
spot.
I'll have damp cloths brought to wash your hands and faces, she told Megden and Lenny. Gathering up Brianna with a gesture, she began herding them toward the tent. At a nod from Perrin, Aram motioned the men to follow him. As soon as you finish your wash, Master Gil, I'd like to talk with you, Perrin said. He might as well have made that spinning wheel of fire. Megden whipped around to gape at him, and the other two women froze in their tracks. Talonvor was suddenly gripping his sword hilt again, and Balwar
Like this
rose on
show
his
back
toes,
in the
peering over his bundle, head tilting this way, then that. Not a wolf, perhaps. Some sort of bird, watching for cats. The stout man, Basil Gill, dropped his belongings and leaped a foot in the air. Why, Perrin, he stammered, snatching off the straw hat. Sweat made tracks in the dust on his cheeks. He bent to pick up his bundle, changed his mind, and straightened again hastily. I mean, Lord Perrin, I thought it was you, but with them calling you Lord, I wasn't sure you'd want to know an old innkeeper. Scrubbing a handkerchief across his nearly bald head, he laughed nervously. Of course, I'll talk to you. Washing can wait a little longer. Hello, Perrin, the hulking man said. With his heavy-lidded eyes, Lamgwyn Dorn appeared lazy despite his muscles and the scars on his face and hands. We heard about young Rand being the Dragon Reborn, Master Gil and me. Should have figured you'd have come up in the world, too. Perrin is a good man, Mistress Megden. I think you could trust him with anything you've a mind to. He was not lazy, and he was not stupid either. Aram jerked his head impatiently, and Lamgwyn and the other two followed, but Talonvor and Balward dragged their feet, casting wondering glances back at Perrin and Master Gil. Concerned glances. And at the women. Fail had them moving again as well, though with plenty of darted looks at Perrin and Master Gil, at the men trailing Aram. Suddenly, they were not so pleased at being separated. Master Gil mopped his forehead and smiled uneasily. Why did he smell afraid? Perrin wondered. Of him? Of a man tied to the Dragon Reborn, calling himself Lord and leading an army, however small, threatening the Prophet? Might as well throw gagging Aes Sedai into it, too. He would take the blame for that one way or another.
Real quick.
No, Perrin thought wryly. Nothing in that to frighten anybody. The whole lot of them were probably afraid he might murder them all. Trying to put Master Gil at ease, he led the man to a large oak 100 paces from the red and white tent. Most of the great tree's leaves were gone, and half those left were brown, but massive limbs spreading low provided a little shade, and some of the gnarled roots stood high enough to serve as benches. Perrin had used one for just that, twiddling his thumbs while camp was being set. Whenever he tried to do anything useful, there were always 10 hands snatching it away from him. Basil Gill was not eased. However much Perrin asked after the Queen's blessing, his inn in Camelin, or recalled his own visit there. But then perhaps Gil was remembering that visit was not the thing to calm a man, with Aes Sedai and talk of the Dark One, and a flight in the night. He paced anxiously and hugged his bundle to his chest, shifted it from one arm to the other, and answered in a bare handful of words, licking his lips between. Master Gil, Perrin told him finally, stop calling me Lord Perrin. I'm not. It's complicated, but I'm not a lord. You know that. Of course, the round man replied, at last seating himself on one of the oak roots. He appeared reluctant to set his bundled things down, drawing his hands from them slowly. As you say, Lord Perrin, Rand, the Lord Dragon, He really means the Lady Elaine to have the throne? Not that I doubt your word, of course, he added hurriedly. Pulling off his hat, he began mopping his forehead again. Even for such a round man, he seemed to be sweating twice as much as the heat called for. I'm sure the Lord Dragon will do just as you say. His laugh was shaky. You wanted to talk to me, and not about my old inn, I'm sure. Baron exhaled wearily. He had thought nothing could be worse than old friends and neighbors bowing and scraping, but at least they forgot sometimes and spoke their minds, and none of them was afraid of him. You're a long way from home, he said in a gentle voice. No need to go too fast, not with a man ready to jump out of his skin. I wondered what brought you here. Not troubles of any kind, I hope. You tell him right, Basil Gill, then he said sharply, marching up to the oak. No embroidery, mind. She had not been gone very long, yet somehow she found time to wash her face and hands and work her hair into a neat white bun on the back of her head, and to beat most of the dust from her plain woolen dress. Bobbing a perfunctory curtsy in Perrin's direction, she turned to shake a gnarled finger at Gill. 3 things annoy to distraction: a tooth that aches, a shoe that pinches, and a man that chatters. So you hold to the point and don't go telling the young lord more than he wants to hear. For a moment she held the gaping innkeeper with an admonitory stare, then abruptly gave Perrin another quick curtsy. He does love the sound of his own voice. Most men do. But he'll tell it to you properly now, my lord. Master Gill glowered at her and muttered under his breath when she waved sharply for him to speak. The yield was what Perrin heard. What happened, the simple and straight of it, the round man glared at Linny again, but she did not appear to notice, was that I had some business down in Lucard, a chance to import wine, but you're not interested in that. I took Lamgwyn along, of course, and Brianna, because she won't let him out of her sight an hour she doesn't have to. Along the way, we met Mistress Dorlane, Mistress Magdin, as we call her, and Linny and Tallenvor, and Baltwar, of course, on the road, near to Lugard. Magdin and I were in service in Murandy, Linny put in impatiently, until the Troubles. Tallenvor was an armsman to the house, and Baltwar the secretary. Bandits burned and Our Lady couldn't afford to keep us, so we decided to travel together for protection. I was telling it to Linny, Master Gill grumbled, scratching behind his ear. The wine merchant had left Lugard for the country for some reason, and he shook his head. It's all too much to go into, Perrin. Lord Perrin, I mean. Forgive me. You know there's trouble everywhere nowadays, one kind or another. Seems like every time we ran from one kind, we found another, and always getting further from Camelin. Till here we are, tired and grateful for a rest. And that's the short of it. Perrin nodded slowly. That could be simple truth, though he had learned that people had 100 reasons for lying, or just shading the truth. Grimacing, he raked fingers through his hair. Light. He was becoming suspicious as a Kyrianan, and the deeper Rand tangled him, the worse it got. Why on earth would Basil Gill, of all people, lie to him? A lady's maid, accustomed to privilege and fallen on hard times? That explained Magdin. Some things were simple. Linny's hands were folded at her waist, but she watched with a keen eye, no little like a falcon herself, and Master Gill began fidgeting as soon as he stopped talking. He seemed to take Perrin's grimace as a demand for more. He laughed, more on edge than amused. I haven't seen so much of the world since the Aiel War, and I was considerably skinnier then. Why, we've been as far as Amador. Of course, we left after those Shonchan took the city, but truth, they aren't any worse than the Whitecloaks that I could... He cut off as Perrin leaned forward abruptly and seized his lapel. Shonchan, Master Gill. Are you sure of that? Or is it one of those rumors like the Aiel or Aes Sedai? I saw them, Gill replied, exchanging uncertain looks with Linny. And that's what they call themselves. I'm surprised you don't know. Word's been running ahead of us all the way from Amador. These Shanshan want people to know what they're about. Strange people with strange creatures. His voice picked up intensity. Like shadow spawn. Big leathery things that fly and carry
Panda, how
men.
you doing, bro?
And these things like lizards. Only they're big as horses, and they have 3 eyes. I saw them. I did. I believe you, Perrin said, releasing the man's coat.
Hope you're having a
I've
good
seen them
night,
too.
bro.
At Falma, where 1,000 white cloaks died in minutes, and it had taken dead heroes of legend, called by the
Got that
Horn
one
of
I'm
Valir,
smoking.
to throw the Shanshan back. Brand had said they would return, but how could they have so soon? Light. If they held on there, they had to have Caravan as well, or most of it. Only a fool killed a deer when he knew there was a wounded bear behind his back. How much had they taken? I can't send you to Camelin right away, Master Gil, but if you stay with me a while longer, I'll see you there safely. If staying with him any length of time was safe. The Prophet, White Cloaks, and now maybe Shanshan added in. You're a good man, Linny said suddenly. I'm afraid we didn't tell you the whole truth, and maybe we should. Linny, what are you saying? Master Gil exclaimed, bounding to his feet. I think the heat's getting to her, he told Perrin. And all the travel. She has strange fancies sometimes. You know how old folks can get. Hush now, Linny. Linny slapped away the hand he was trying to put over her mouth. You mind yourself, Basil Gill. I'll always you. Megden was running from Talonvor, in a manner of speaking, and he was chasing her. We all were. 4 days now, and near killing us and the horses both. Well, it's no wonder she doesn't know her own mind half the time. You men snarl up a woman's wits so she can hardly think, then you pretend you've done nothing at all. A lot of you ought to have your ears boxed on general principle. The girl's afraid of her own heart. Those two should be married, and the quicker the better. Master Gil gaped at her, and Perrin was not sure his own mouth might not be hanging open. I'm not certain I understand what it is you want of me, he said slowly, and the white-haired woman leaped in before he was well finished. Don't pretend to be dense. I won't believe it in you for a moment. I can see you have more wits than most men. That's the worst habit you men have, making believe you don't see what's plain under your noses. What had happened to all those curtsies? Folding thin arms across her chest, she eyed him sternly. Well, if you must pretend, I'll set it out for you. This Lord Dragon of yours does whatever he wants, the way I hear. Your prophet picks out people and marries them on the spot. Very well. You snatch up Megden and Talonvor and marry them. He'll thank you, and so will she, when her mind settles. Stunned, Perrin glanced at Master Gil, who shrugged and made a sickly grin. If you will forgive me, Perrin told the frowning woman, I have some matters I must see to. He hurried away, only looking back once, then he shaking a finger at Master Gil, berating him despite his protests. The breeze was wrong for Perrin to hear what they were saying. In truth, he did not want to. They were all crazy. Verlaine might have her 2 maids and her thief-catchers, but Fail had her own attendants of a sort.
That's one down.
Close on 20 young Tyrans in Carianen were sitting cross-legged near the tent, the women in coats and breeches with swords belted on, just like the men. None wore their hair longer than the shoulder, and men and women both had it tied back with a ribbon, imitating the Aiel tail. Perrin wondered where the rest were. They seldom strayed far from the sound of Aiel's voice. Not causing trouble, he hoped. She had taken them under her wing to keep them out of trouble, she said, and the light knew they would have gotten into it, left back in Carian with a great lot of young fools just like them. In Perrin's opinion, the whole lashing of them needed a swift kick in the bottom to knock some sense into them. Dueling, playing at Giotto, pretending to be some sort of Aiel. Idiocy. Lucille rose to her feet as Perrin came closer. pale little woman with red ribbons pinned to her lapels, small gold hoops in her ears, and a challenging stare that sometimes made the Two Rivers men think she might like a kiss, despite her sword. Right then, the challenge was stony hard. A moment behind her, Arla stood too, tall and dark, with her hair cut short as a maiden's, and her clothes plainer than most of the men. Unlike Lucille, Arla made it clear she would as soon kiss a dog as any man. The pair made as if to move in front of the tent to block Perrin's way, but a square-chinned fellow in a puffy-sleeved coat barked an order and they sat again. Reluctantly. For that matter, Paraleon thumbed that block of a chin as though he might be reconsidering. He'd worn a beard the first time Perrin saw him. Several of the Tyran men had had them, but Aiel did not wear beards. Perrin muttered about foolishness under his breath. They were Fael's to the bone, and the fact that he was her husband meant little. Aram might be jealous of his attentions, yet Aram at least shared his affections with Fael. He could feel the young idiot's eyes on him as he strode inside. Fael would skin him if she ever learned that he hoped they would keep her from trouble. The tent was tall and spacious, with a flowered carpet for a floor and sparse furnishings that folded for storage on a cart. Most of them. The heavy stand mirror certainly could not. Except for brass-bound chests draped with embroidered cloths and doubling as extra tables, straight lines of bright gilt decorated everything down to the washstand and its mirror. A dozen mirrored lamps made the interior nearly as bright as outside, yet considerably cooler, and there were even a pair of silk hangings dangling from the roof poles, too ornate for Perrin's taste. Too rigid, with the birds and flowers marching in lines and angles. Dobrain had set them up to travel like Carian and nobles, though Perrin had managed to lose the worst of it. The huge bed, for one, a ridiculous thing to travel with. It had taken up almost a whole cart to itself. Fael and Megden were sitting alone together, worked silver cups in hand. They had the air of women feeling one another out, all smiles on the outside, yet with a hint of sharpness to the eyes, a hint of listening for something behind the words, and not a clue as to whether they would hug in the next instant or draw knives. Well, he thought most women would not actually go so far as knives, but Fael could. Megden appeared much less travel-worn than she had, washed and combed, the dust brushed from her dress. A small mosaic-topped table between them held more cups, and a tall, sweating silver pitcher that gave off the minty scent of herb tea. Both men looked around at his entrance, and for an instant, they had almost exactly the same expression, coolly wondering who was barging in, and not at all pleased with the interruption. At least Fael softened hers immediately with a smile. "Master Gill told me your story, Mistress Dorlane," he said. "You've faced hard days, but you can be sure you're safe here till you decide to leave." The woman murmured thanks over the rim of her cup, but she smelled wary, and her eyes tried to read him like a book. "Megden also told me their story, Perrin," Fael said, "and I have an offer to make her. Megden, you and your friends have had trying months behind, and you tell me of no prospects ahead. Enter my service, all of you. You will still have to journey, but the circumstances will be much better. I pay well, and I am not a harsh mistress." Perrin voiced his approval immediately. If Fael wanted to indulge her fancy for taking in strays, at least he wanted to help this lot too. Maybe they would be safer with him than wandering around alone at that. Choking on her tea, Megden nearly dropped her cup. She blinked at Fael, dabbing at the damp on her chin with a lace-edged linen handkerchief, and her chair creaked faintly as she turned, strangely, to study Perrin. "I thank you," she said at last, slowly. "I think..." Another moment's perusal of Perrin, and her voice picked up. "Yes, I thank you, and I accept your kind offer gratefully. I must tell my companions." Rising, she hesitated in setting her cup on the tray, then straightened only to spread her skirts in a curtsy suitable for any palace. "I will try to give good service, my lady," she said levelly. "May I withdraw?" At Fail's ascent, she curtsied again and backed away 2 steps before turning to go. Perrin scratched his beard. Somebody else who would be bobbing at him every time she turned around. No sooner had the tent flap dropped behind Megden than Fail put her own cup down and laughed, drumming her heels in the carpet. Oh, I like her, Perrin. She has spirit. I'll wager she would have singed your beard over those banners if I hadn't saved you. Oh, yes, spirit. Perrin grunted. Just what he needed, another woman to singe his beard. I promised Master Gil to look after them, Fail, but can you guess what that Linny asked? She wanted me to marry Megden to that fellow Talonlor. Just stand them up and marry them, whatever they said. She claimed they wanted. He filled a silver cup with tea and dropped into the chair Megden had vacated, ignoring its alarming groans under his sudden weight. In any case, that nonsense is the least of my worries. Master Gil says it was the Shonchan took Armador, and I believe him. Light, the Shonchan. Fail tapped her fingertips together, staring across them at nothing. That might be just the thing, she mused. Most servants do better married than not.
Okay.
Perhaps I should arrange it. And for Brianna, too. The way she went running out of here to check on that big fellow as soon as her face was clean, I suspect they should be all ready. There was a gleam in her eye. I won't have that kind of behavior in my servants, Perrin. It just leads to tears and recriminations and sulking. And Brianna will be worse than he is. Perrin stared at her. Did you hear me? He said slowly. The Shonchan have captured Amador. The Shonchan, Fail. She gave a start. She really had been thinking about marrying off those women. Then smiled at him, amused. Amador is a long way yet. And if we do meet with these Shonchan, I'm sure you will deal with them. After all, you taught me to perch on your wrist, didn't you? That was what she claimed, though he had never seen any sign of it. They might be a touch more difficult than you were, he said dryly, and she smiled again. She smelled extremely pleased for some reason. I'm thinking about sending Grady and Neil to warn Rand no matter what he said. She shook her head fiercely, smiles evaporating, but he pushed on. If I knew how to find him, I would. There has to be some way to get word to him without anyone learning of it. Rand had insisted on that, more than he had on secrecy about Massima. Perrin had been exiled from Rand's presence, and no one was to know anything remained between them except enmity. He knows, Perrin. I'm sure of it. Megden saw pigeon coats everywhere in Amador, and apparently the Shonchan didn't look at them twice. By this time, any merchant who has business with Amador has heard, and so has the White Tower. Believe me, Rand must have too. You have to trust that he knows best. In this, he does. She was not always so certain of that. Maybe, Perrin muttered irritably. He tried not to worry about Rand's sanity, but Rand made Perrin at his most suspicious look like a child skipping in a meadow. How much did Rand trust even him? Rand kept things back, had plans he never let on. Exhaling, Perrin settled back in the chair, gulped a swallow of tea. The truth of it was, mad or sane, Rand was right. If the Forsaken caught a suspicion of what he was up to, or the White Tower did, they would find some way to overturn the anvil on his feet. At least I can give the Tower's eyes and ears less to talk about. This time I'm burning that bloody banner.
Thought I
And
heated
the
it up
Wolfhead,
enough.
too. You might have to play at being a lord, but he could do it without a bloody flag. Fail's full lips pursed judiciously, and she shook her head slightly. Slipping from her chair, she knelt beside him, took his wrist in her hands. Perrin met her level gaze warily.
Not sure
When she
what
looked
I'm
at him
gonna
so
do now,
intently, so seriously, she was about to tell him something
but
important.
it's gonna suck.
That, or pull the wool over his eyes and spin him around till he did not know front from back. Her scent told him nothing. He tried
I
to stop
definitely don't
smelling
have
her,
luck with
It was all
Fucking
too easy to
bastards,
lose
man.
himself in that. And then she would pull the wool over his eyes. One thing he had learned since marrying, a man needed all of his wits dealing with a woman. Too often,
I doubt
even that
them.
was
I'm
not enough.
fucking blind
Women
as
did
hell.
what they wanted as surely as I said I. You might want to reconsider, husband, she murmured. A tiny smile quirked her mouth as if she once again knew what he was thinking. I doubt anyone who's seen us since we entered Gillidan knew what the Red Eagle is. Around a town the size of Bethel, some will, though. And the longer we have to hunt for Masima, the greater the chance. He did not bother with saying that was all the more reason to get rid of the banner. Aiel was no fool, and she thought much faster than he. Then why keep it? He asked slowly. When all it'll do is draw eyes to the idiot everybody will think is trying to pull Manetheren out of the grave. Men had tried that in the past, and women too. The name of Manetheren carried powerful memories, and it was convenient for anyone who wanted to start a rebellion. Because it will draw eyes. She leaned toward him intently. To a man trying to raise up Manetheren again.
On me. I was
I
trying
said
to
folks will
adjust
smile
them.
to your face.
I
Hope
heated
you
it up
ride
a
on
little
soon
bit
and try to forget
to
you as
make
soon
it
as you
like
do. As for
bend
the
a little
greater,
bit better, but I
they have
guess
too
I
much in
didn't
front of their faces
heat it
right
up
now to look
enough.
twice unless you pinch their noses. Compared to the Sean-Chan or the Prophet or the White Cloaks, a man trying to raise Manetheren is small turnips. And I think it's safe to say the tower won't look twice either, not now. Her smile widened, and the light in her eyes said she was about to make her most telling point. But most important, no one will think that man is doing anything else. Abruptly, her smile vanished. She stuck a finger against his nose, hard.
Bouncing.
And don't call yourself an idiot, Parent Bashir Ibarra. Not even sideways like that. You aren't, and I do not like it. Her scent was tiny spikes. Not true anger, but definitely displeased. Quicksilver. A kingfisher flashing by faster than thought. Certainly faster than his thoughts.
I don't know if
It
it'll
would never
work.
have occurred
There's
to
not
him to
enough
hide so
space right there.
flagrantly. But he could see the sense. It was like concealing the fact that you were a murderer by claiming to be a thief. Yet it might work. Chuckling, he kissed her fingertip. The banner stays, he said. He supposed that meant the wolf head did too. Blood and bloody ashes. Alejandra has to know the truth,
and they're all broken.
If she thinks Rand means to set me up as king of Manetheren and take her lands.
Ones that weren't.
Aiel rose so suddenly, turning away, that he was afraid he had made a mistake bringing up the queen. Alejandra could lead to Berlin all too easily, and Aiel smelled
had to start a GoFundMe for
wary.
bastards.
But what she said over her shoulder was, Alejandra won't be a bit of trouble for Perrin Golden Eyes. That bird's as good as knitted, husband. So it's time to put our minds on how to find Masima. Kneeling gracefully beside a small chest against the tent wall, the only chest without draperies, she lifted the lid
All my other ones
and
I
began
have
removing
are
rolled maps.
secret weapon
Perrin
up
hoped
too.
she was right about Alejandra, because he did not know what to do if she was wrong. If only he were half what she thought him. Alejandra was a netted bird. The Sean-Chan would fall over like dolls for Perrin Golden Eyes, and he would snatch up the prophet and take him to Rand if Masima had 10,000 men around him. Not for the first time he realized that however much her anger hurt and confused him, it was her disappointment he feared. If he ever saw that in her eyes, it would rip the heart out of his
definitely
chest.
affects the eyes when I take them off.
He knelt beside her and helped her spread out the largest map covering the south of Gildan and the north of Amadisia, and studied it as though Masima's name would leap off the parchment at him. He had more reason than Rand to want to succeed. Whatever else, he could not fail Aiel.
Fail lay in the darkness, listening until she was sure that Perrin's breath had the deep rhythm of sleep, then slipped out from the blankets they shared. Rueful amusement touched her as she pulled her linen nightdress up over her head. Did he really think she would not find out that he had hidden the bed deep in a copse one morning while the carts were being loaded? Not that she minded, not a great deal at least. She was sure she had slept on the ground as often as he. She had pretended surprise, of course, and made light of it. Anything else, and he would have apologized, perhaps even gone back to fetch the bed. Managing a husband was an art, so her mother said. Had Dira ni Galeen ever found it so difficult? Scuffing her bare feet into slippers, she shrugged into a silk robe, then hesitated, looking down at Perrin. He would be able to see
Yeah,
her
because,
clearly if he woke, but to her he was just a shadowed mound. She wished her mother were there now to
the
advise her.
nose stings.
She loved Perrin with every fiber of her being, and he confused every fiber. Actually understanding men was impossible, of course, but he was so unlike anyone she had grown up with. He never swaggered, and instead of laughing at himself, he was modest. She had
Right,
not
that's not a
believed a
bad
man
idea.
could be modest. He insisted that only chance had made him a leader, claimed he
It
did
would
not know
probably
how
make
to
a good
lead, when men who met him were ready to
magnet is
follow after an hour. He dismissed his own
whatchamacallit,
thinking as slow, when
the
those
little
slow,
magnets in the
considering thoughts
grinders.
saw so deeply that she had to dance a merry jig to keep any secrets at all. He was a wonderful man, her curly-haired wolf, so strong and so gentle. Sighing, she tiptoed from the tent. His ears had caused her difficulties before. The camp lay quiet beneath a gibbous moon that gave as much light in a cloudless sky as it normally would have full, a brightness that washed out the stars. Some sort of night bird cried shrilly, then fell silent at an owl's deep hoot. There was a small breeze, and for a wonder it actually seemed a little cool. Probably her imagination. The nights were cool only in comparison to the days. Most of the men were asleep, dark humps among the shadows beneath the trees. A few remained awake, talking around the handful of fires still burning. She made no effort to hide, but none noticed her. Some appeared half asleep where they sat, heads nodding. If she had not known how well the men on sentry duty would be keeping watch, she might have thought the camp could be surprised by a herd of wild cattle. Of course, the maidens would be on guard in the night, too, but it did not matter if they saw her either. The high-wheeled carts made long, shadowed rows, the servants already snug and snoring beneath, most of the servants. One fire still crackled there. Megden and her friends sat around it. Talanvor was talking, gesturing fiercely, but only the other men seemed to be paying him any mind, though he
Right,
appeared to be
like
addressing himself
elements.
to Megden.
Think it's how
That
to
they had
take
had
it.
better garb in their
See
bundles
how
than
this
those mere
goes.
rags was not surprising, but their former mistress must have had a very free hand to give out silk to her people, and Megden wore finely cut silk indeed, in a muted blue. None of the others was dressed so well, so perhaps Megden had been their lady's favorite. A twig snapped under Fail's foot, and heads whipped around, Talanvor starting to his feet, half drawing his sword before he saw her gathering her robe in the moonlight. They were more alert than the Two Rivers men behind her. For an instant the lot of them just stared at her, then Megden rose gracefully and made a deep curtsy, and the others hastily followed her example with varying degrees of skill. Only Megden and Balwer appeared at all at ease. A nervous smile split Gil's round face. Go on with what you were doing, Fail told them kindly, but don't stay up too late. Tomorrow will be full. She walked on, but when she glanced back, they were still standing, still peering after her. Their travels must have made them wary as rabbits, always watching for a fox. She wondered how well they would fit in. Over the next few weeks, she would be busy training them to her ways, learning theirs. One was as important as the other for a well-run household. The time would have to be found. They did not stay long in her thoughts, though. Soon she was beyond the carts, not quite out to where Two Rivers men would be keeping sharp watch from up in the trees. Nothing larger than a mouse would get by them unseen. Even some of the maidens had been spotted upon occasion, but they were watching for anyone attempting to sneak in. Not for those who had a right to be there. In a small moonlit clearing, her people were waiting. Some of the men bowed, and Paraleon nearly went to one knee before stopping himself. Several women instinctively made curtsies that looked quite peculiar in men's garb, then dropped their eyes or shifted in embarrassment at realizing what they had done. The manners of the court had been bred into them, though they tried very hard to adopt Aiel customs. What they believed were Aiel customs, at least. Sometimes they horrified the maidens with what they believed. Perrin called them fools, and they were in some ways, but they had sworn fealty to her, these Kyrianen and Tyrans. Water oath they named it, copying the Aiel, trying to. And that made them hers. Among themselves, they had taken to calling their society Cha-Fail, the Falcon's Talon, though they had seen the necessity of keeping that quiet. They were not fools in all ways. In fact, around the edges anyway, they were not too unlike the young men and women she had grown up with. Those she had sent off early that morning had just returned, for the women among them were still changing out of the dresses they had worn of necessity. Even one woman dressed as a man would have roused notice in Bethal, not to mention 5. The clearing was a great flurry of skirts and shifts, coats and shirts and breeches. The women made believe they did not mind being unclothed in front of others, including men, since the Aiel apparently did not, but haste and labored breathing gave them the lie. The men were all shifting feet and turning heads, torn between looking away decently and watching as they thought the Aiel did, while pretending they were not looking at half-dressed women. Fail held her robe close over her nightdress. She could not have dressed further without waking Perrin for sure, but she made no pretense at comfort. She was no Domani to receive her retainers in her bath. "Forgive us for being late, my lady Fail," Salanda panted, tugging her coat on. The accents of Kyrian were sharp in the short woman's voice. Even for a Kyrianan, she was not tall. She managed a credible swagger, though, a suitable boldness in the tilt of her head and the set of her shoulders. "We would have returned sooner, but the gate guards made a bother letting us out." "A bother?" Fail said sharply. If only she could have seen with her own eyes on top of theirs. If only Perrin had let her go instead of that trollop. No, she would not think about Verolaine. It was not Perrin's fault. She repeated that to herself 20 times a day, like a prayer. But why was the man so blind? "What kind of bother?" She drew a chagrined breath. Troubles with your husband should never affect your tone with your vassals. "Nothing of note, my lady." Salanda buckled her sword belt and settled it on her hips. "They let some fellows ahead of us drive their wagons through without a second look, but they were worried about letting women go out into the night." Some of the other women laughed. The 5 men who had gone into Bethal stirred irritably, no doubt because they had not been thought enough protection. The rest of Cha-Fail made a thick semicircle behind those 10, watching Fail closely, listening closely. Moonlight shadowed their faces. "Tell me what you saw," Fail commanded in a calmer tone. "Much better." Salanda made her report concisely, and for all Fail's wishes that she had gone herself, she had to admit they had seen almost as much as she could have wished. The streets of Bethal were nearly empty, even at the busiest hours of the day. People stayed to their own homes as much as possible. A little commerce trickled in and out, but few merchants ventured into this part of Gildan, and barely enough food came in from the countryside to keep everyone fed. Most of the townspeople seemed stunned, afraid of what lay outside the walls, sinking deeper and deeper into apathy and despair. Everyone kept their mouths closed for fear of the prophet's spies, and their eyes as well, for fear of being taken for spies. The prophet had a deep effect. For instance, however many bandits roamed the hills, cut purses and footpads had vanished from Bethal. It was said the prophet's penalty for a thief was to cut off the man's hands, though that did not seem to apply to his own people. "The queen tours the city every day, showing herself to keep spirits up," Salanda said. "But I do not think it helps much. She is making a progress here in the south to remind people they have a queen. Maybe she has had more success elsewhere. The watch has been added to the wall guards and all but a handful of her soldiers, too. Perhaps it makes the townsfolk feel safer. Until she moves on. Unlike everyone else, Aleandra herself apparently feels no fear the prophet will come storming over the walls. She walks alone in the gardens of Lord Telabin's palace, morning and evening, and keeps only a few soldiers who spend most of their time in the kitchens. Everybody in the city seems as concerned with food, with how long there will be enough, as they are with the profit. In truth, my lady, for all the guards on the walls, I think if Massima appeared at the gates alone, they might give him the town. They would, Meralda put in
Yeah.
contemptuously,
I've done
buckling
it
her own sword
quite
round
a
her
few
waist,
times.
and beg for mercy. Dark and stocky,
Sad to
Meralda
say.
was as tall as Fail, but the Tyran woman ducked her head
Like I
at
said,
a
I got
frown from
this
Salanda
set.
and murmured an
I had a
apology.
set I was wearing.
There
It's a
were
set I
no
was
doubts
wearing.
who led Shah Fail
The way these
after
shit
Fail herself.
that messes me up because
She had been pleased there was no need
they're
to
my
change the
bifocals.
precedents they had established.
the ones I'm supposed to
Salanda
be
was the
wearing,
brightest
but
of
when
them,
they're broken
except
like
perhaps
that,
for
it
Perleon,
sits all
and only
messed up.
Arla and Kamila were quicker.
But I
And
got that
Salanda
one,
had something extra,
these
a
ones,
steadiness, as if she had already faced the worst fear in her life, and
another
nothing could
set
ever be that bad again.
that are broken.
Of
They
course,
lost
she
the
wanted a
nose
scar like
pieces and
those some of the
they're all
maidens
jacked
had.
up.
Fail
Then I
possessed
got another
several
set
small
that
scars,
I
badges of
have
honor,
that,
most of them,
yeah,
but actually
they're
seeking
broken
one was
too.
idiocy. At least the woman was not too very eager in the matter. We made a map, as you required, my lady, the diminutive woman
All I need
finished
now
with a
is a
last
sponsor for
warning glance
glasses,
at Meralda.
and I'd be
We
set.
marked out Lord Televin's palace on the back as much as we
Wishful
could,
thinking,
but I
guess.
fear that is not much more than the gardens and stables.
I could get them
Fail
online
did
for
not
pretty
try to make
cheap.
out the lines
That's
on
why
the
I
paper
got
she
'em, but
unfolded in the moonlight. A
it was just
pity
the
she
point
had
of
not
getting
been
the
able to
money.
go herself. She could have mapped the interior,
To
too.
get replacement
No.
frames is a little
Done was
harder.
done, as
That's a
Perrin
little
liked to say,
pricey. At
and it
least
was
doing
enough.
it in town
You are certain no one searches wagons
because they
leaving
don't
the
have very
city?
good prices. Versus
Even in
when
the
I did
pale light, she
online.
could see confusion on many of the faces in front of her. None knew why she had sent some of them into Bethel. Salanda did not look confused. Yes, my lady, she said calmly, quite bright, and more than quick enough. The wind gusted for a moment, rustling leaves on the trees, rustling dead leaves on the ground, and Fail wished she had Perrin's ears, his nose and eyes, too. It did not matter if anyone saw her here with her retainers, but eavesdroppers would be something else. You've done very well, Salanda. All of you have. Perrin knew the dangers here, as real as any farther south. He knew, but like most men, he thought with his heart as often as his head. A wife had to be
Now, but I've
practical
done
to
it
keep her
having to do
husband
it
out of
here
trouble.
from the
That had been her
arms.
mother's very
'cause
first piece
I
of
always
advice
got to
on
adjust
married
them
life.
just so they fit
At first
comfortable.
light, you will return to Bethel,
And then
and if
I'm
you
always
receive word
adjusting
from
this
me, this
part
is what you will do.
on some just because
Even Salanda's eyes
they
widened in
hurt the back
shock
of
as she
my
went
ear.
on, but no one murmured the slightest protest. Fail would have been
And
surprised if anyone had. Her instructions were to
I'm
the
always
point.
adjusting them like here.
There would be some danger,
That way
but
they
under the
sit on my
circumstances,
nose
not nearly what
somewhat
might have been.
comfortable.
Are there any
Because
questions? She said finally. Does everyone understand?
how bad
With one
my
voice,
vision
Shah
is,
Fail answered.
my
We live to serve Our Lady Fail.
lenses are
And that meant they would serve
on
her
the heavy
beloved
side.
whether
'cause
he
they're
wanted
thick.
them to or not. Megden shifted in her blankets on the hard ground, sleep eluding her. That was her name now. A new name for a new life. Megden for her mother, and Dorlane for a family on an estate that had been hers. A new life for an
Yeah, but
old
without my
life
glasses,
gone.
I can't hardly
But
see
ties
anything.
of the heart could not be cut.
Just to read something, I gotta
And
have it
now,
right
now,
like that.
a faint crackle of dead leaves brought her head up, and she watched a dim shape pass through the trees. The Lady Fail, returning to her tent from wherever she had gone. A pleasant young woman, kind-hearted and well-spoken. Whatever her husband's stock, she almost certainly was nobly born, but young, inexperienced. That might be a help. Megden let her head fall back on the cloak she had wadded up for a pillow. White. What was she doing here? Taking service as a lady's maid? No. She would hold on to her confidence in herself, at least. She could still find that. She could, if she dug deeply. Her breath caught at the sound of footsteps close by. Talonvor knelt gracefully at her side. He was shirtless, moonlight gleaming on the smooth muscles of his chest and shoulders, his face in shadows. A slight breeze ruffled his hair. What madness is this? He asked softly. Entering service? What are you up to? And don't tell me that nonsense about making a new life. I don't believe it. No one does. She tried to turn away, but he laid a hand on her shoulder. He exerted no pressure, yet it stopped her as surely as a halter. Light, please let her not tremble. The light did not listen, but at least she managed to keep her voice steady. If you haven't noticed, I must make my way in the world now. Better as a lady's maid than a tavern maid. You may feel free to go on alone if service here doesn't suit. You didn't abdicate your wits or your pride when you gave up the throne, he muttered. Burn Linny for revealing that. If you mean to pretend that you did, I suggest you avoid letting Linny get you alone. The man chuckled at her. He chuckled, oh, so richly. She wants a word with Megden, and I suspect she won't be as gentle with Megden as she was with Morgaze. Angrily, she sat up, brushing his hand away. Are you blind? And deaf as well? The Dragon Reborn has plans for Elaine. Light, I wouldn't like it if he simply knew her name. It must be more than chance that brought me to one of his henchmen, Talonvor. It has to be. Burn me, I knew it must be that. I hoped I was wrong. He sounded as angry as she. He had no right to be angry. Elaine is safe in the White Tower. The Amerlin seat won't let her anywhere near a man who can channel, even if he is the Dragon Reborn, especially if he is. And Megden Dorlane can do nothing about the Amerlin seat, the Dragon Reborn, or the Lion Throne. All she can do is get her neck snapped or her throat cut, or... Megden Dorlane can watch, she broke in, at least partly to stop that awful litany. She can listen. She can... Irritably, she trailed off. What could she do? Suddenly, she realized she was sitting there in a thin shift and hurriedly folded her blankets around her. The night actually seemed a little cool, or maybe the goosebumps on her skin were from Talonvor's unseen eyes on her. The thought roused a flush in her cheeks she hoped he could not see. Luckily, it put a heat in her voice, too. She was not a girl to go blushing because a man looked at her. I will do what I can, whatever that is. The chance will come to learn something or do something that will help Elaine, and I will take it. A dangerous decision, he told her calmly. She wished she could make out his face in the darkness, only to read his expression, of course. You heard him threaten to hang anyone who looked at him the wrong way. I can believe it in a man with those eyes. I was surprised he let that fellow go. I thought he'd rip his throat out. If he discovers who you are, who you used to be, Balwer might betray you. He never really explained why he helped us escape, Amador. Maybe he thought Queen Morgaze would give him a new position. Now he knows there's no chance of that, and he might want to curry favor with his new master and mistress. Are you afraid of Lord Perrin Goldeneyes? She demanded contemptuously. Light, the man frightened her. Those eyes belonged on a wolf. Balwer knows enough to hold his tongue. Anything he says will reflect on him. He came with me, after all. If you're afraid, then ride on. You always fling that in my face, he sighed, settling back on his heels. She could not see his eyes, but she could feel them. Ride on if you wish, you say. Once there was a soldier loved a queen from afar, knowing it was hopeless, knowing he could never dare speak. Now the queen is gone, and only a woman remains, and I hope. I burn with hope. If you want me to leave, say it. One word. Go. A simple word. She opened her mouth. A simple word, she thought. Light is only one word. Why can't I say it? Light, please. For the second time that night, the light failed to hear. She sat there, huddled in her blankets like a fool, her mouth open, her face growing hotter and hotter. If he had chuckled again, she would have put her belt knife in him. If he had laughed or given any sign of triumph. Instead, he leaned forward and gently kissed her eyes. She made a sound deep in her throat. She could not seem to move. Wide-eyed, she watched him stand. He loomed in the moonlight. She was a queen. She had been a queen, used to command, used to hard decisions in hard times, but right then the pounding of her heart drummed thought from her head. Had you said go, he told her, I'd have buried hope, but I could never leave you. Not until he was back in his own blankets could she make herself lie down and draw hers around her. She breathed as if she had been running. The night was cool. She was shivering, not trembling. Talonvor was young, too young. Worse, he was right. Burn him for that. A lady's maid could do nothing to affect events. And if the Dragon Reborn's wolf-eyed killer learned that he had Morgaze of Andor in his hands, she could be used against Elaine instead of helping her. He had no right to be right when she wanted him to be wrong. The illogic of that thought infuriated her. There was a chance she might do some good. There had to be. In the back of her head, a small voice laughed. You can't forget that you're Morgaze Trakand, it told her scornfully. And even after she's abdicated her throne, Queen Morgaze can't stop trying her hand in the affairs of the mighty, no matter how much ruin she's made of it so far. And she can't tell a man to go away, either, because she can't stop thinking how strong his hands are and how his lips curve when he smiles. And, furious, she pulled the blanket over her head, trying to shut out the voice. She was not staying because she could not walk away from power. As for Talonvor, she would set him firmly in his place. This time she would. But what was his place, with a woman who was no longer a queen? She tried to put him out of her mind, and tried to ignore that mocking voice that would not be quiet. Yet when sleep finally came, she could still feel the pressure of his lips on her eyelids.
Chapter 9. Tangles. Perrin woke before first light as usual, and as usual, Fail was already up and about. She could make a mouse seem noisy when she wanted to, and he suspected that if he woke an hour after lying down, she would still manage to be up first. The door flaps were tied back, the side panels raised a little at the bottom, and a stir of air rose through the vent hole in the peak, enough to create an illusion of coolness. Perrin actually shivered while searching for his shirt and breeches. Well, it was supposed to be winter, even if the weather did not know it. He dressed in the dark and scrubbed his teeth with salt, needing no lamps. When he left the tent, stamping his feet into his boots, Fail had her new servants gathered around her in the deep grayness of early morning, some holding lighted lanterns. The Lord's daughter needed servants. He should have arranged for it before this. There were 2 rivers folk in Camelin that Fail had trained herself, but with the need for secrecy, there had been no way to fetch them along. Master Gil would want to go home as soon as possible, and Lamgwyn and Brianna with him. But maybe Megden and Linny would stay. Aram straightened from where he had been sitting cross-legged beside the tent and waited silently on Perrin. If Perrin had not stopped him, Aram would have slept across the entrance. This morning, his coat was striped red and white, though the white was a trifle dingy.
I had to start a
wolf had pummeled sword hilt rose over his shoulder.
GoFundMe here soon.
Perrin had left his axe
Help
in the
me get a
tent
new set
and
of,
grateful to be rid of it.
at least
Talonvor still wore his sword belted over his coat, but not Master Gil or the other 2. Fail must have been watching, because no sooner did Perrin come out than she gestured toward the tent, clearly issuing orders. Megden and Brianna came bustling past him and Aram with lanterns, their jaws set, smelling
That
of
or someone needs to
determination
buy
for some
my
reason.
Nintendo
Neither
Switch I have.
curtsied, a pleasant surprise. Linny did, a quick bend of the knee before she darted after the other 2, muttering about knowing their place. Perrin suspected Linny was one of those women who saw her place as being in charge. Come to think of it, most women did. That was the way of the world, it seemed, not just the 2 rivers. Talonvor and Lamgwyn followed close behind the women, and Lamgwyn was as serious about bowing as Talonvor, who was almost grim. Perrin sighed and bowed back, and they both gave a start, gaping at him. A curt shout from Linny jerked them into the tent. With only a quickly flashed smile for him, Fail strode off toward the carts, talking alternately to Basil Gil on one side of her, and Sebin Balwer on the other. The men each held a lantern out to light her way. Of course, a double handful of those idiots kept pace where they could hear if she raised her voice, strutting and stroking sword hilts, and staring about in the dimness as though they expected an attack or hoped for one. Perrin tugged at his short beard. She always found plenty of work to fill her hours, and nobody took it out of her hands. Nobody would dare. Not so much as the first fingers of dawn showed on the horizon yet, but the Carriennen were beginning to stir around the carts, and moving more quickly the closer Fail came. By the time she reached them, they appeared to be trotting, their lanterns bobbing and swinging in the dimness. The Two Rivers men, used to farmers' days, were already making breakfast, some laughing and roughhousing around their cook fires, some grumping, but most getting the work done. A few tried to stay in their blankets and were unceremoniously tumbled out. Grady and Neild were up too, as always off by themselves, shadows in black coats among the trees. Perrin could not recall seeing them without those coats, always buttoned to the neck, always clean and unwrinkled come sunrise, whatever they had looked like the night before. Stepping through the forms in unison, the pair were practicing the sword as they did every morning. That was better than their evening practice, when they would sit cross-legged, hands on knees, staring at some distant nothing. They never did anything that anyone could see, yet not a man in the camp but knew what they were about and kept as far off as possible. Not even the maidens would step into their line of sight then. Something was missing, Perrin realized with a start. Fail always had one of the men meet him first thing with a bowl of the thick porridge they breakfasted on, but it seemed she had been too busy this morning. Brightening, he hurried toward the cook fires, hoping at least to be able to dip his own porridge for once. A small hope. Flan Barsteer, a lanky fellow with a dent in his chin, met him halfway and shoved a carved bowl into his hands. Flan was from up toward Watch Hill, and Perrin did not know him well, but they had been hunting together a time or two, and once Perrin helped him dig one of his father's cows out of a bog hole in the waterwood. "The Lady Fail told me to bring this to you, Perrin," Flan said anxiously. "You won't tell her I forgot, will you? You won't tell? I found some honey, and I put in a good dollop." Perrin tried not to sigh. At least Flan had remembered his name. Well, maybe he could not get away with doing the simplest chores for himself, but he was still responsible for the men eating beneath the trees. Without him, they would be with their families, getting ready for the day's chores around the farm, milking cows and cutting firewood instead of wondering whether they might have to kill or be killed before sunset. Gulping down the honeyed porridge quickly, he told Aram to take his ease over breakfast. But the man looked so miserable that he relented, so Aram followed as he made his way around the camp. The journey was not one Perrin enjoyed. Men put down their bowls when he approached, or even stood until he passed. He gritted his teeth whenever somebody he had grown up with, or worse, a man who had sent him on errands as a boy, called him Lord Perrin. Not everyone did, but too many. Far too many. After a time, he gave up telling them to stop out of sheer weariness. All too often the reply was, "Oh, whatever you say, Lord Perrin." It was enough to make a man howl. Despite that, he made himself pause to speak a word or two to every man. Mainly, though, he kept his eyes open, and his nose. They all knew well enough to keep their bows in good repair and tend the fletching and points on their arrows. But some would wear the soles out of their boots or the bottom out of their breeches without noticing, or let blisters fester because they could not be bothered to do anything about them just yet. Several had the habit of picking up brandy when they could, and 2 or 3 of those had no head for it at all. There had been a small village the day before reaching Bethel that held no fewer than 3 inns. It was very strange. Having Mistress Luhan or his mother tell him he needed new boots or his breeches mended had always been embarrassing, and he was sure he would have been irritated at the same from anybody else. But from grizzled old John Dinbaran on down, the Two Rivers men just said, "Why, right you are, Lord Perrin. I'll see to it straight away," or some such. He caught a number of them grinning at one another when he moved on, and they smelled pleased. When he rooted a clay jar of pear brandy out of Jory Conger's saddlebags, a skinny fellow who ate twice as much as anyone else and always looked as if he had not had a bite in a week. Jory was a good shot with a bow, but given a chance, he would drink until he could not stand, and he had light fingers besides. Jory gave him a wide-eyed look and spread his hands as if he did not know where the jar had come from. But as Perrin walked on, emptying the brandy onto the ground, Jory laughed. "You can't put anything over on Lord Perrin." He sounded proud. Sometimes Perrin thought he was the only sane person left. Another thing he noticed, one and all, they were very interested in what he did not say. Man after man cast an eye toward the 2 banners that occasionally flapped atop their poles in a brief gust, Red Wolfhead and Red Eagle. They eyed the banners and watched him, waiting for the order he had given every time the things had come out since reaching Gildan. And often enough before that. Except that he had said nothing yesterday, and he said nothing today, and he saw speculation blooming on men's faces. He left behind clusters of men peering at the banners and at him, murmuring excitedly among themselves. He did not try to listen. What would they say if he was wrong? If the White Cloaks or King Auron decided they could look away from the Prophet and the Shonchan long enough to snuff out a supposed rebellion? They were his responsibility, and he had already gotten too many of them killed. The sun was more than peaking above the horizon, spreading a sharp morning light by the time he finished, and over at the tent, Talonvor and Mamblin, lugging out chests under Linny's direction,
But this one's
Legdon and Brianna appeared to be sorting the contents out on a broad patch
nice
of dead
Damascus
grass,
one.
blankets and linens mainly, and long bright swaths of
Just got
silk
some
satin
paracord
that had
around
been
the
intended
handle.
to drape the bed he had misplaced. Fael must have been inside because that gaggle of idiots were cooling their heels not far off.
And then I got
No carrying and
K-bar.
hauling for them, useful as rats in the barn. Farron thought about taking a look at Stayer and Stepper, but when he glanced through the trees at the horse lines, he was seen. No fewer than 3 of the farriers stepped out anxiously, watching him. They were blocky men in leather aprons, like as eggs in a basket, though Falton had only a fringe of white around his head. Eamon was graying, and Jarrett had not yet come into his middle years. Farron growled at the sight of them. They would hover if you laid a hand on either horse, and goggle if you lifted a hoof. The one time he had tried to change a worn shoe on Stayer,
This is a couple
all
of
6
them that I have
visitors had darted about, grabbing up
handy.
tools before he could touch them, nearly knocking the bay over in their rush to do the work themselves. "They're afraid you don't trust them," Aram said suddenly. Farron looked at him in surprise, and Aram shifted his shoulders in his coat. "I've talked to them some. They think if a lord tends his own horses, it must be because he doesn't trust them. He might send them off with no way to get home." His tone said they were fools to think that, but he gave Perrin a sideways glance and shrugged again uncomfortably. "I think they're embarrassed, too. If you don't behave the way they think a lord should, it reflects on them as they see it." "Right," Perrin muttered. Fael had said the same, about them being embarrassed anyway, but he had believed it just the lord's daughter talking. Fael had grown up surrounded by servants, yet how could a lady know the thoughts of a man who had to work for his bread? He frowned toward the horse lines. 5 of the farriers stood together watching him now, embarrassed that he wanted to look after his own horses and upset that he did not want them pulling wool and scratching gravel all over the place. "Do you think I have to act like a fool in silk small clothes?" he asked. Aram blinked and began studying his boots. "Light," Perrin growled. Spotting Basil Gill hurrying from the direction of the carts, Perrin moved to meet him. He did not think he had done very well at making Gill feel at ease yesterday. The stout man was talking to himself and once more mopping his head with a kerchief, sweating away in a rumpled dark gray coat. The day's heat was beginning to take hold already. He did not see Perrin until Perrin was nearly on him, and then he gave a jump, stuffing the kerchief into a coat pocket and making a bow. He looked curried and brushed fit for a feast day. "Ah, my lord Perrin, your lady told me to take a cart into Bethal. She says I'm to find you some 2 Rivers tobacco if I can. But I don't know if that's possible. 2 Rivers leaf has always been dear, and trade isn't what it was." "She's sending you for tobacco?" Perrin said, frowning. He supposed secrecy had gone down the well, but still. "I bought 3 casks, 2 villages back. Enough for everybody." Gill shook his head firmly. "Not 2 Rivers leaf, and your lady says you like that above any other. The Gil Dunnan leaf will do for your men. I'm to be a Shambayan, she calls it, and keep you and her supplied with what you need. Not much different from what I did running the blessing, really." The similarity seemed to amuse him. His belly shook with quiet chuckles. "I have quite a list, though I can't say how much of it I'll find. Good wine, herbs, fruit, candles and lamp oil, oilcloth and wax, paper and ink, needles, pins, all sorts of things. Talonvor and Lamgwin and I are going, with some of your lady's other retainers. His lady's other retainers. Talonvor and Lamgwin were bringing out yet another chest for the women to sort through. They had to pass by the squatting clump of young fools who never offered to lend a hand. In fact, the layabouts ignored them completely. You keep an eye on that lot, Perrin cautioned. If one of them starts any trouble, if he even looks as if he will, you have Lamgwin crack his head. And if it was one of the women, they were just as likely, maybe more so, Perrin grunted. Fail's retainers were going to tie his belly into permanent knots yet. Too bad she could not be satisfied with the likes of Master Gill and Megden. You didn't mention Bulwer. Has he decided to go on alone? Just then, a shift in the breeze brought him Bulwer's scent, an alert smell very much at odds with the fellow's almost desiccated exterior. Even for so reedy a man, Bulwer made surprisingly little noise on the dried leaves underfoot. In a sparrow-brown coat, he offered a quick bow, and his tilted head added to the image of a bird. "I am staying, my lord," he said cautiously. Or maybe that was just his manner. "As your gracious lady's secretary. And yours, if it pleases you." He stepped closer, very nearly a hop. "I am well versed, my lord. I possess a good memory and write a good hand, and my lord can be assured that whatever he confides in me will never pass my lips to another. The ability to keep secrets is a primary skill of a secretary. Don't you have pressing duties for our new mistress, Master Gill?" Gill frowned at Bulwer, opened his mouth, then closed it with a snap. Spinning on his heel, he trotted away toward the tent. For a moment, Bulwer watched him go, head to one side, lips pursed thoughtfully. "I can offer other services as well, my lord," he said finally. "Knowledge. I have overheard some of my lord's men speaking, and I understand that my lord may have had some difficulties with the children of the light. A secretary learns many things. I know a surprising amount about the children." "With any luck, I can avoid white cloaks," Perrin told him. "Better if you knew where the prophet is, or the Shan-Chan." He did not expect any of that, of course, but Bulwer surprised him. "I cannot be certain, of course, but I think the Shan-Chan have not spread far beyond Amador as yet. Fact is difficult to sift from rumor, my lord, but I keep my ears open. Of course, they do seem to move with unexpected suddenness. A dangerous people with large numbers of Tarabana soldiers. I believe from Master Gill that my lord knows of them, but I observed them closely in Amador, and what I saw is at my lord's disposal. As to the prophet, there are as many rumors concerning him as the Shan-Chan, but I believe I can say reliably that he was recently at Abela, a largish town some 40 leagues south of here." Bulwer smiled thinly, a brief, self-satisfied smile. "How can you be so sure?" Perrin said slowly. "As I said, my lord, I keep my ears open. The prophet reportedly closed a number of inns and taverns and tore down those he considered too disreputable. Several were mentioned, and by chance I happen to know there are inns of those names in Avila. I think there is little chance another town would have inns with the same names." He flashed another narrow smile. He certainly smelled pleased with himself. Perrin scratched his beard thoughtfully. The man just happened to remember where some inns that Massima supposedly had torn down were located, and if Massima turned out not to be there after all, well, these days rumors sprouted like mushrooms after rain. Bulwer sounded a man trying to build up his own importance. "Thank you, Master Bulwer. I'll keep that to mind. If you hear any more, be sure to tell me." As he turned to go, the man caught his sleeve. Bulwer's skinny fingers leaped away immediately, as though burned, and he made one of those bird-like bows, dry washing his hands. Forgive me, my lord. I hesitate to press, but do not take the white cloaks too lightly. Avoiding them is wise, but it may not be possible. They are much closer than the Shangjian. Eamon the new Lord Captain Commander, led most of their numbers toward northern Amadisia before Amador fell. He was hunting the Prophet also, my lord. Volda is a dangerous man, and Radam Asunawa, the Grand Inquisitor, makes Volda seem pleasant. And I fear neither has any love for your own lord. Forgive me. He bowed again, hesitated, then went on smoothly. If I may say so, my lord's display of Manetherin's banner is inspired. My lord will be more than a match for Valda and Asunawa if he takes care. Watching him bow himself away, Perrin thought he knew part of Bulwer's story now. Clearly, he also had run afoul of the White Cloaks. That could take no more than being on the same street with them, a frown at the wrong time, but it seemed Bulwer had a grudge. A sharp mind, too, seeing right away about the Red Eagle, and a sharp tongue with Master Gil. Gil was on his knees beside Megden, talking rapidly despite Lenny's effort to hush him. Megden had turned to stare after Bulwer as the fellow hurried through the trees toward the carts. But now and then her gaze swung to Perrin. The rest of them clustered close to her, peering now at Bulwer, now at Perrin. If he had ever seen a group of people worried about what somebody else had said, it was they. But what were they worried he might have heard? Backbiting, probably. Tales of resentments and misdeeds, real or imagined. People cooped up together tended to start pecking at one another. If that was it, maybe he could put a stop before somebody drew blood. Talonvor was fondling his sword hilt again. What did Fail intend to do with the fellow? Aram, I want to go talk to Talonvor and that lot. Tell them what Bulwer said to me. Just slide it into the talk, but tell everything. That should soothe fears of tale-bearing. Fail said servants needed to be made to feel at home.
It's always good to have a
Make
couple
friends with
good,
them if you
awesome
can,
ladies.
Aram.
Especially good
But if you decide to
verbal
moon over
ways.
one of the women, be sure it's Lenny. The other two are taken. The man had a smooth tongue for any pretty woman, but he managed to look surprised and offended both. As you wish, Lord Perrin, he muttered sulkily. I'll catch you up quickly. I will be over with the Aiel. Aram blinked. Ah, yes. Well, it might take a while at that if I'm to make friends with them. They don't look like they much want friends to me. This from a fellow who stared suspiciously at anyone except Fail, who came near Perrin, and never smiled for anyone not wearing a skirt. Nevertheless, he went over and squatted on his heels where he could speak to Gil and the others. Even from a distance, their standoffishness was plain. They continued with their work, only now and then saying a word to Aram, and they looked at each other as often as at him. Skittish as green quail in summer, when the foxes were teaching the cubs to hunt. But at least they were talking. Perrin wondered what mischief Aram had gotten up to with the Aiel. There did not seem to have been any time for it. But he did not wonder long. Any serious trouble with Aiel usually meant someone dead and not the Aiel. In truth, he was not so eager to meet the wise ones himself. He walked around the curve of the hill, but instead of climbing the slope, his feet carried him all the way to the Mayenners. He had stayed away from their camp as much as possible, too, and not simply because of Barrelane. There were disadvantages to having too keen a nose. Fortunately, a freshening breeze was carrying most of the stink away, though it did little for the heat. Sweat rolled down the faces of the mounted sentries in their red armor. At the sight of him, they sat up even more rigidly in their saddles, which was saying something. Where the Two Rivers men rode like fellows heading out to the fields, the Mayenners usually were statues on horseback. They could fight, though. The light said there was no need. Avi and Norella came running, buttoning up his coat before Perrin was well past the sentries. A dozen or so other officers followed at Norella's heels, all coated and some fastening the straps of their red breastplates. 2 or 3 carried helmets with thin red plumes tucked under their arms. Most were years older than Narella, some twice his age, graying men with hard, scarred faces. But Narella's reward for helping to rescue Rand had been to be named Gallien's second, his first lieutenant, they called it. "The first hasn't returned yet, Lord Perrin," Narella said, making a bow mirrored by the others. A tall, slender man, he did not look as young as he had before Demise Wells. There was an edge to his eyes, which had seen more blood than most veterans of 20 battles. But if his face was harder, there was still an eagerness to please in his scent. To Javi and Narella, Perrin Ibarra was a man who could fly or walk on water as he chose. The morning patrols saw nothing. Those that are back. I would have reported otherwise. Of course, Perrin told him. I just wanted to look about a bit. He simply meant to walk around until he could work up his nerve to face the wise ones, but the young Mayenner followed him with the rest of the officers, anxiously watching for Lord Perrin to find some flaw in the winged guards, wincing whenever they came on bare-chested men tossing dice on a blanket, or some fellow snoring away with the sun on the climb. He need not have bothered. To Perrin, the camp looked laid out with a plumb line and level. Each man had his blankets and his saddle for a pillow, not more than 2 paces from where his horse was tied to one of the long ropes drooping between chest-high poles, set upright in the ground. A cook fire stood every 20 paces, with lances stacked in steel-tipped cones between. The whole made a sort of box around 5 peaked tents, one striped golden blue and larger than the other 4 combined. All very different from the 2 Rivers men's every-which-way arrangement. Perrin walked along briskly, trying not to look too much a fool. He was not sure how much success he was having. He itched to stop and look over a horse or two, just to be able to pick up a hoof without somebody practically fainting. But mindful of what Aram had said, he kept his hands to himself. Everyone seemed as startled as Narella at his pace. Tough-eyed bannermen chivied men to their feet, only to have Perrin stride by with a nod before they were all upright. A puzzled murmur trailed in the air behind him, and his ears caught a few comments about officers, lords in particular, that he was just as glad Narella and the others missed. Finally, he found himself on the verge of the camp, staring up the brushy slope toward the Wise Ones' tents. Only a few of the maidens were visible among the scattered trees up there, and some of the Gaishain. "Lord Perrin," Narella said hesitantly, "the Aes Sedai." He stepped closer and lowered his voice to a hoarse whisper. "I know they swore to the Lord Dragon, and I've seen things, Lord Perrin. They do camp chores. Aes Sedai. This morning, Mosuri and Helmet came down to fetch water. And yesterday, after you returned,
hurting my nose.
yesterday I thought I heard someone up there crying out. It couldn't have been one of the sisters, of course," he added hurriedly, and laughed to show how ridiculous the idea was. A very shaky laugh.
Kind of in focus, but out of focus. At
You
the
will
same
see that
time,
everything is all right.
That's making my head hurt.
He had ridden into 40,000 Shido, leading 200 Lancers, but talking about this had him hunching his shoulders and shifting his feet. Of course, he had ridden into 40,000 Shido because an Aes Sedai wanted him to. "I'll do what I can," Perrin muttered. Maybe matters were worse than he had thought. Now he had to stop them getting worse still, if he could. He would rather have faced the Shido again. Narella nodded as though Perrin had promised all he had asked and more. "That is well, then," he said, sounding relieved. Casting sideways glances at Perrin, he worked himself up to say something else, but apparently this was not so touchy as the Aes Sedai. "I heard that you let the Red Eagle stay." Perrin very nearly jumped. Even for just around the hill, news had traveled fast. "It seemed the thing to do," he said slowly. Berylane would have to know the truth, yet if too many knew, that truth would spread from the next village they passed, the next farm. "This used to be part of Manetheren," he added, as if Narella did not know that perfectly well. Truth. He had gotten so he could bend truth like an Aes Sedai. and to men on his side. Not the first time that flag's been raised around here, I'll warrant, but none of those fellows had the Dragon Reborn behind him. And if that did not set the necessary seeds, he did not know how to plow a furrow. Abruptly, he realized that what seemed every last one of the winged guards was watching him with their officers, no doubt wondering what he was saying, after all but running through that way. Even the lean, balding old soldier Galien called his dog robber had come out to stare, and Berlane's maids, a pair of plump, plain-faced women, garbed to match their mistress's tent. Perrin had hardly seen a thing, but he knew he had to give some sort of praise. Raising his voice enough to carry, he said, "The winged guards will do Mayenne proud if we ever face another Dumai's Wells." Those were the first words that came to mind, but he winced at saying them. To his shock, shouting rose straight away among the soldiers, cheering Perrin Golden Eyes and Mayenne for Golden Eyes and Golden Eyes and Manetherin. Men danced and capered, and some snatched lances from the stacks to shake them so the red streamers waved in the breeze. Grizzled bannermen watched them with arms folded, nodding approval. Norella beamed, and not only him. Officers with gray in their hair and scars on their faces grinned like boys, praised their lessons. Light, he was the only sane man left. He prayed never to see another battle. Wondering whether this was going to cause trouble with Berlane, he made his goodbyes with Norella and the others, tramped up the slope through dead or dying brush, none of it waist high. Brown weeds crackled beneath his boots. Shouting still filled the Mayenner camp. Even after she learned the truth, the First might not be pleased to have her soldiers cheering him this way. Of course, that could have good points. Maybe she would be angry enough to stop pestering him. Short of the crest, he paused, listening to the cheers finally fade away. No one was going to cheer him here. All of the side flaps were down on the Wise One's low gray-brown tents, closing them in. Only a few of the maidens were in sight now. Squatting easily on their heels beneath a leather leaf that still showed some green, they eyed him curiously. Their hands moved quickly in that way they had of talking among themselves with signs. After a moment, Sulin rose, shifting her heavy belt knife, and strode in his direction, a tall, wiry woman with a pink scar across her sun-dark cheek. She glanced back down the way he had come and seemed relieved that he was alone, though it was often hard to tell with Aiel. "That is good, Perenebara," she said quietly. "The Wise Ones have not been pleased that you make them come to you. Only a fool displeases Wise Ones, and I have not taken you for a fool." Perrin scrubbed at his beard. He had been keeping clear of the Wise Ones and the Aes Sedai as much as possible. But he had had no intention of forcing them to come to him. He just found their company uncomfortable, to put it mildly. "Well, I need to see Adara now," he told her, "about the Aes Sedai." "Perhaps I was mistaken after all," Sulin said dryly. "But I will tell her." Turning, she paused. "Tell me something. Terrell Winter and Purin Alhara are close to Siona Tryon, like first brothers with a first sister. She does not like men as men, yet they offer to take her punishment for her. How could they shame her so?" He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. A pair of Gaishain appeared from the reverse slope, each leading two of the Aiel's pack mules. The white-robed men passed within a few paces, heading down toward the stream. He could not be sure, but he thought both were Shido. The pair kept their eyes meekly down, barely looking up enough to see where they were going. They had had every opportunity to run away, doing chores like that without anyone to watch. A peculiar people. "I see you are shocked too," Sulin said. "I had hoped you could explain. I will tell Adara." As she started for the tents, she added over her shoulder, "You wetlanders are very strange, Perenebara." Perrin frowned after her, and when she vanished into one of the tents, he turned to frown at the two Guy Shine leading the horses to water. Wetlanders were strange. Light. Cinderella had been right in what he heard. It was beyond time to stick his nose into what was going on between the Wise Ones and the Aes Sedai. He should have before this. He wished he did not think it would be the same as sticking his nose into a hornet's nest. It seemed to take a long time for Sulin to reappear, and she did little to help his mood when she did. Holding the tent flap for him, she flicked his belt knife contemptuously with a finger as he ducked through. "You should be better armed for this dance, Pt.4, she said. Inside, he was surprised to find all 6 Wise Ones sitting cross-legged on colorful tasseled cushions, their shawls tied around their waists and their skirts making carefully arranged fans across the layered rugs. He had hoped for just Adara. None looked to be more than 4 or 5 years older than he, some no older at all, yet somehow they always made him feel as if he were facing the oldest members of the women's circle, the ones who had spent years learning to sniff out whatever you wanted to hide. Separating one woman's scent from another's was all but impossible, but he hardly needed to. 6 sets of eyes latched onto him, from Janita's pale sky blue to Marlene's purple twilight, not to mention Navarin's sharp green. Every eye could have been a skewer. Adara brusquely motioned him to take a cushion himself, which he did with gratitude, though it put him facing them all in a semicircle. Maybe Wise Ones had designed these tents to make men bend their necks if they wanted to stand upright. Strangely, it was cooler in the dim interior, but he still felt like sweating. Maybe he could not pick one from another, yet these women smelled like wolves studying a tethered goat. A square-faced Guy Shine, who was half again as big as he was, knelt to offer a golden cup of dark wine punch on an elaborate silver tray. The Wise Ones already had mismatched silver cups and goblets. Unsure what it meant that he was being offered gold. Maybe nothing, yet who could say with Aiel? Perrin took it cautiously. It gave off the scent of plums. The fellow bowed meekly enough when Adara clapped her hands and bent himself out of the tent backward, but the half-healed slash down his hard face had to date from Demise Wells. "Now that you are here," Adara said as soon as the tent flap dropped behind the Guy Shine, "we will explain again why you must kill the man called Masima Dagar." "We should not have to explain again," Delora put in. Her hair and eyes were nearly the same shade as Magdan's, but no one would call her pinched face pretty. Her manner was pure ice. "This Masima Dagar is a danger to the Karakan. He must die. The Dreamwalkers have told us, Pt.4. Corella certainly was pretty, and though her fiery hair and piercing eyes made her look as though she had a temper, she was always mild, for a Wise One, and certainly not soft. They have read the dream. The man must die. Perrin took a swallow of plum punch to gain a moment. Somehow the punch was cool. It was always the same with them. Rand had not mentioned any warning from the Dreamwalkers. The first time Perrin had mentioned that, only the once, they had thought he was casting doubt on their word, and even Corella had gone hot-eyed. Not that Perrin thought they would lie. Not exactly. He had not caught them in one anyway. But what they wanted for the future, and what Rand wanted, what he himself wanted for that matter, might be very different things. Maybe it was Rand who was keeping secrets. "If you could just give me some idea what this danger is," he said finally. "The Light knows Masima's a madman, but he supports Rand. A fine thing if I go around killing people on our side. That will certainly convince people to join Rand." Sarcasm was lost on them. They looked at him unblinking. "The man must die," Adara said at last. "It is enough that 3 Dreamwalkers have said so, and 6 Wise Ones tell you. The same as always." Maybe they did not know any more than that, and maybe he should get on with why he had come. "I want to talk about Sionid and Masuri," he said, and 6 faces turned to frost. Like these women could stare down a stone. Setting the wine cup beside him, he leaned toward them stubbornly. I'm supposed to show people Aes Sedai sworn to Rand. He was supposed to show Masima, actually, but this did not seem a good time to mention that. They aren't going to be very cooperative if you lot beat them. Light, they're Aes Sedai. Instead of making them haul water, why don't you learn from them? They must know all sorts of things you don't. Too late, he bit his tongue. The Aiel women did not take offense, though. Not that it showed, anyway. They know some things we do not, Delora told him firmly, and we know some they do not. As firmly as a spear point in the ribs. We learn what there is to learn, Perrin Ebara, Marlene said calmly, combing nearly black hair with her fingers. She was one of the few Aiel he had seen with such dark hair, and she often toyed with it. And we teach what there is to teach.
I'll be right back.
In any event, Janina said, it is none of your affair. Men do not interfere between wise ones and apprentices. She shook her head over his foolishness. You may stop listening outside and come in, Siona Trigon, Hidara said suddenly. Perrin blinked in surprise, but none of the women batted an eye. There was a moment of silence, then the tent flap twitched aside, and Siona ducked inside, kneeling quickly on the rugs. That vaunted Aes Sedai serenity was shattered in her. Her mouth was a thin line, her eyes tight, her face red. She smelled of anger, frustration, and a dozen more emotions, all whirling about so quickly that Perrin could barely separate any out. May I speak to him? She asked in a stiff voice. If you take care what you say, Hidara told her. Sipping her wine, the wise one watched over the rim of her cup. A teacher watching a pupil? A hawk watching a mouse? Perrin could not be sure. Except that Hidara was very sure of her place, whatever the pairing. So was Sioned. But that did not carry over to him. She twisted around to face him on her knees, back going straight, eyes heated. Anger raged in the smell of her. Whatever you know, she said angrily, whatever you think you know, you will forget. No, there was not a shred of serenity left in her. Whatever is between the wise ones and us is for us alone. You will stand aside, avert your eyes, and keep your mouth closed. Amazed, Perrin raked his fingers through his hair. Light, you're upset because I know you got us switching? He said incredulously. Well, he would have been too, but not alongside the rest. Don't you know these women would as soon cut your throat as look at you? Slit your throat and leave you by the side of the road? Well, I promised myself I wouldn't let that happen. I don't like you, but I promised to protect you from the wise ones or the Ashimano Rand himself. So come down off that high horse. Realizing he was shouting, he drew a deep, embarrassed breath and settled back on his cushion, snatched up his wine cup, and took a long drink. Siona went stiffer by the word with indignation, and her lip curled well before he finished. You promised? She sneered. You think Aes Sedai need your protection? You... Enough, Hidara said quietly, and Siona's jaw snapped shut, though her hands made white-knuckled fists clutching her skirts. What makes you think we would kill her, Perrin Ebara? Janina asked curiously. Aiel seldom showed much on their faces, but the others frowned at him, or looked with open incredulity. I know how you feel, he replied slowly. I've known since I saw you with the sisters after Dumai's Wells. He was not about to explain that he had smelled their hatred, their contempt, every time a wise one looked at an Aes Sedai back then. He did not smell it now, but no one could maintain that level of fury for long without bursting. That did not mean it was gone, only that it had sunk deep, maybe into the bone. Delora snorted, a sound like linen ripping. First you say they must be cuddled because you need them, and now because they are Aes Sedai, and you have promised to protect them. Which is truth, Perrin Ebara? Both. Perrin met Delora's hard gaze for a long moment, then eyed each of the others in turn. Both are true, and I mean both. The wise ones exchanged glances, the sort where every flicker of an eyelid held 100 words and no man could make out a one. Finally, in a shifting of necklaces and readjusting of tied shawls, they appeared to reach agreement. "We do not kill apprentices, Pt.4, Navarin said. She sounded shocked at the idea. "When Pt.4 asked us to apprentice them, perhaps he thought it was just to make them obey us. But we do not speak empty words. They are apprentices now. They will remain so until 5 wise ones agree they are ready to be more," Marlene added, sweeping her long hair over her shoulder. "And they are treated no differently than any others." Adara nodded over her wine cup. "Tell him the advice you would give him concerning Masima Dagar, Sioned Tragan," she said. The kneeling woman had practically writhed during Navarin and Marlene's short speeches, gripping her skirt until Perrin thought the silk might rip, but she wasted no time complying with Adara's instructions. "The wise ones are right, whatever their reasons. I do not say this because they wish it." She drew herself up again, smoothing her features with a visible effort. A touch of heat still flared in her voice, though. "I saw the work of so-called dragon swarm before I ever met Randall Thor. Death and destruction to no purpose. Even a faithful dog must be put down if he begins to foam at the mouth." "Blood and ashes," Perrin grumbled. "How can I even let you in the sight of the man after that? You swore fealty to Rand. You know that isn't what he wants. What about that? Thousands will die if you fail." Light, if Masuri felt the same, then he had to put up with Aes Sedai and wise ones for nothing. No, worse. He would have to guard Masima from them. "Masuri knows Masima for Rabbit as well as I," Sioned replied when he put the question to her. All of her serenity had returned. She regarded him with a cool, unreadable face. Her scent was sharply alert, intent. As if he needed his nose, with her eyes fixed on his, big and dark and bottomless. "I swore to serve the Dragon Reborn, and the best service I can give him now is to keep this animal from him. Bad enough that rulers know Masima supports him. Worse if they see him embrace the man. And thousands will die if you fail to get close enough to Masima to kill him." Perrin thought his head would spin. Again an Aes Sedai whirled words about like a top, made it seem she had said black when she meant white. Then the wise ones added their bit. "Masuri Sakawa," Navarin said calmly, "believes the rabid dog can be leashed and bound so he may be used safely." For an instant, Sioned looked as surprised as Perrin felt, but she recovered quickly. Outside, she did. Her scent was suddenly wary, as if she sensed a trap where she had not expected one. "She also wishes to fit you for a halter, Pt.4, Corella added, even more casually. "She thinks you must be bound also, to make you safe." Nothing on her freckled face told whether she agreed. Adara raised a hand toward Sioned. "You may go now. You will not listen further, but you may ask Garadin again to let you heal the wound on his face. Remember, if he still refuses, you must accept it. He is Gaishain, not one of your Wetlander's servants." She invested that last word with depths of scorn. Sioned stared icy augurs at Perrin. She looked at the wise ones, her lips trembling on the brink of speech. In the end, though, all she could do was go with as good a grace as she could muster. Outwardly, that was considerable, and Aes Sedai being Aes Sedai, fit to shame a queen. But the scent she trailed behind her was frustration sharp enough to cut. As soon as she was gone, the 6 wise ones focused on Perrin again. "Now," Adara said, "you can explain to us why you would put a rabid animal next to the Karakan." "Only a fool obeys another's command to push him over a cliff," Navarin said. "You will not listen to us," Janina said, "so we will listen to you. Speak, Pt.4. Perrin considered making a break for the door flaps, but if he did, he would leave behind one Aes Sedai who might possibly be of some doubtful help, and another, along with 6 wise ones, who were all set to ruin everything he had come to do. He put his wine cup down again and settled his hands on his knees. He needed a clear head if he was to show these women he was no tethered goat. Chapter 10. Changes. When Perrin left the Wise One's tent, he considered removing his coat to see whether his hide was still attached and whole. Not a tethered goat, maybe, but a stag with 6 she-wolves on his heels, and he was unsure what fast feet had gained him. For certain, none of the Wise Ones had changed their mind, and their promises not to take any action on their own had been vague at best. About the Aes Sedai, there had been no promises, even foggy ones. He looked for either of the sisters and found Masuri. A narrow rope had been tied between 2 trees, and a fringed red and green rug draped over it. The slender brown was flailing away with a bent wood beater, raising thin clouds of dust, motes that floated glittering in the mid-morning sun. Her warder, a compact man with dark receding hair, sat on a fallen tree trunk nearby, watching her glumly. Robert Kirkland normally had a ready grin, but it was buried deep today. Masuri caught sight of Perrin, and with barely a pause in her rug beating, shot him a look of such frozen malevolence that he sighed. And she was the one who thought as he did. As close to it as he was likely to find, anyway. A red-tailed hawk passed overhead, riding rising currents of hot air from hill to hill without flapping its outstretched wings. It would be very nice to soar away from all this. The iron in front of him, not dreams of silver. Nodding to Sulin and the maidens, who might have taken root under that leather leaf, Perrin turned to go, and stopped. 2 men were climbing the hill, one an Aiel in the grays and browns and greens of the cotton sore, his cased bow on his back, a bristling quiver at his belt, and his spears and round-hide buckler in hand. Gaul was a friend, and the only man among the Aiel who did not wear white. His companion, a head shorter and a broad-brimmed hat and coat and breeches of a plain dull green, was no Aiel. He had a full quiver at his belt, too, and a knife even longer and heavier than the Aielman's, but he carried his bow, much shorter than a 2 Rivers longbow, though longer than the horn bows of the Aiel. Despite his clothes, he did not have the look of a farmer, or a city man either. Perhaps it was the graying hair tied at the nape of his neck and hanging to his waist, the beard fanning across his chest, or perhaps just the way he moved, much like the man at his side, slipping around the brush on the hill so that you were sure no twig snapped in his passing, no weeds broke under his foot. Perrin had not seen him in what seemed a very long time. Reaching the hilltop, Elias Machera regarded Perrin, golden eyes shining faintly in the shadow of his hat brim. His eyes had been that way years before Perrin's. Elias had introduced Perrin to the wolves. He had been dressed in hides then. "Good to see you again, boy," he said quietly. Sweat glistened on his face, but little more than on Gaul's. "You give away that axe finally? I didn't think you'd ever stop hating it." "I still do," Perrin said just as quietly. A long time ago, the one-time warder had told him to keep the axe until he stopped hating to use it. Light, but he still hated it. And he had added new reasons now. "What are you doing in this part of the world, Elias? Where did Gaul find you?" "He found me," Gaul said. "I did not know he was behind me until he coughed." He spoke loudly enough to be heard by the maidens, and the sudden stillness among them was solid as a touch. Perrin expected at least a few cutting comments. Aiel humor could near draw blood, and the maidens seized any chance to dig at the green-eyed man. But instead, some of the women took up spears and bucklers to rattle them together in approbation. Gaul nodded approval. Elias grunted ambiguously and tugged his hat down, yet he smelled pleased. The Aiel did not approve of much this side of the Dragon Wall. "I like to keep moving," he told Perrin, "and I just happened to be in Gildan when some mutual friends told me you were traveling with this parade." He did not name the mutual friends. It was unwise to speak openly about talking to wolves. "Told me a lot of things. Told me they smell a change coming. They don't know what. Maybe you do." I hear you've been running with the Dragon Reborn. I don't know, Perrin said slowly. A change? He had not thought to ask the wolves anything more than where large groups of men were, so he could go around them. Even here in Gildan, sometimes he felt blame among them for the wolves dead at Dumai's wells. What kind of change? Rand is surely changing things, but I couldn't say what they mean. Like the whole world is turning somersaults, never mind him. All things change, Gull said dismissively. Until we wake, the dream drifts on the wind. For a moment he studied Perrin and Elias, comparing their eyes. Perrin was sure. He said nothing about them, though. The Aiel seemed to take golden eyes as just one more peculiarity among Wetlanders. I will leave you two to talk alone. Friends long separated need to talk by themselves. Sulin, are Chiad and Bane about? I saw them hunting yesterday and thought I might show them how to draw a bow before one of them shoots herself. I was surprised to see you come back today, the white-haired woman replied. They went out to set snares for rabbits. Laughter rippled through the maidens, and fingers flickered rapidly in hand talk. Sighing, Gaul rolled his eyes ostentatiously. In that case, I think I must go cut them loose. Almost as many maidens laughed at that, including Sulin. May you find shade this day, he told Perrin, a casual farewell between friends. But he clasped forearms formally with Elias and said, My honor is yours, Elias Machera. Odd fellow, Elias murmured, watching Gaul lope back down the hill. When I coughed, he turned around ready to kill me, I think. Then he just started laughing instead. You have any objections to going somewhere else? I don't know the sister who's trying to murder that rug, but I don't like taking chances with Aes Sedai. His eyes narrowed. Gaul says there are 3 with you. You don't expect to be meeting up with any more, do you? I hope not, Perrin replied. Masuri was glancing their way between slashes with the beater. She would learn about Elias's eyes soon enough and start trying to ferret out what else linked him to Perrin. Come on. It's time I was back in my own camp anyway. Are you worried about meeting an Aes Sedai who knows you? Elias's days as a warder had ended when it was learned he could talk to wolves. Some sisters thought it a mark of the Dark One, and he had had to kill other warders to get away. The older man waited until they were a dozen paces from the tents before he replied, and even then he spoke quietly, as though he suspected someone behind them might have ears as good as theirs. One who knows my name will be bad enough. Warders don't run off often, boy. Most Aes Sedai will set free a man who really wants to go. Most will. And anyway, she can track you down however far you run if she decides to hunt. But any sister who finds a renegade will spend her idle moments making him wish he'd never been born. He shivered slightly. His smell was not fear, but anticipation of pain. Then she'll turn him over to his own Aes Sedai to drive the lesson home. A man's never quite the same after that. At the edge of the slope, he looked back. Masuri did seem to be trying to kill the carpet, focusing all her rage on attempting to beat a hole through it. Elias shivered again, though. Worst thing would be to run into Rena. I'd rather be caught in a forest fire with both legs broken. Rena's your Aes Sedai? But how could you run into her? The bond lets you know where she is. That nudged something in Perrin's memory, but whatever it was, melted away at Elias's reply. A fair number can fuzz the bond, in a manner of speaking. Maybe they all can. You don't know much more than she's still alive, and I know that anyway, because I haven't gone crazy. Elias saw the question on his face and barked a laugh. Light, man. A sister's flesh and blood, too. Most are. Think about it. Would you want somebody inside your head while you cuddled up with a likely wench? Sorry, I forgot you were married now. No offense meant. I was surprised to hear you had married a Saldean, though. Surprised? Perrin had never considered that about the water bond. Fight, for that matter. He had never really thought about Aes Sedai that way. It seemed about as possible as as a man talking to wolves. Why surprised? They started down through the trees on this side of the hill, not hurrying and making little noise. Perrin had always been a good hunter, accustomed to the forests, and Elias hardly disturbed the leaves underfoot, gliding smoothly through the undergrowth without shifting a branch. He might have slung his bow on his back now, but he still carried it ready. Elias was a wary man, especially around people. Why? Because you're a quiet sort, and I thought you'd marry somebody quiet, too. Though you know by now Saldeans aren't quiet. Except with strangers and outsiders. Set the sun on fire one minute, and the next, it's all blown away and forgotten. Make our felon look stolid and Damani downright dull. Elias grinned suddenly. I lived a year with a Saldean once, and Maria shouted my ears off 5 days in the week, and maybe heaved the dishes at my head, too. Every time I thought about leaving, though, she'd want to make up, and I never seemed to get to the door. In the end, she left me, said I was too restrained for her taste. His rasping laugh was reminiscent, but he rubbed at a faint, age-faded scar along his jaw reminiscently, too. It looked to have been made by a knife. Bail's not like that. It sounded like being married to Nynaeve. Nynaeve with sore teeth. I don't mean she doesn't get angry now and then, he admitted reluctantly. But she doesn't shout and throw things. Well, she did not shout very often, and instead of flaring hot and vanishing, her anger started hot and dragged on till it turned cold. Elias glanced at him sideways. If I ever smelled a man trying to dodge hail, you've been giving her soft words all the time, haven't you? Mild as milk water, and never lay your ears back? Never raise your voice to her? Of course not, Perrin protested. I love her.
I'll be right
Why would
back.
I shout at her? Elias began muttering under his breath, though Perrin could hear every word, of course. Burn me. A man wants to sit on a red adder, it's his affair. Not my business if a man wants to warm his hands when the roof's on fire. It's his life. Will he thank me? No, he bloody well won't. What are you going on about? Perrin demanded. Catching Elias's arm, he pulled him to a stop beneath a winterberry tree, its prickly leaves still mostly green. Little else nearby was, except for some struggling creepers. They had come less than halfway down the hill. Bail isn't a red adder or a roof on fire. Wait until you meet her before you start talking like you know her. Irritably, Elias raked fingers through his long beard. I know Saldeans, boy. That year wasn't the only time I've been there. I've only ever met about 5 Saldean women I'd call meek or even mild-mannered. No, she isn't an adder, but what she is a leopard, I'll wager. Don't growl, burn you. I'll bet my boots she'd smile to hear me say it. Perrin opened his mouth angrily, then closed it again. He'd not realized he was growling deep in his throat. Bail would smile at being called a leopard. You can't be saying she wants me to shout at her, Elias.
Do that.
Yes, I am. Most likely, anyway. Maybe she's the 6th. Maybe. Just hear me out. Most women, you raise your voice, and they go bugle-eyed or ice. And next thing you know, you're arguing about you being angry. Never mind what put the ember down your back in the first place. Swallow your tongue with a Saldean, though, and to her, you're saying she isn't strong enough to stand up to you. Insult her like that, and you're lucky she doesn't feed you your own gizzard for breakfast. She's no far-matting wench to expect a man to sit where she points and jump when she snaps her fingers. She's a leopard, and she expects her husband to be a leopard, too. Light, I don't know what I'm doing. Giving a man advice about his wife is a good way to get your innards spilled. It was Elias's turn to growl. He jerked his hat straight unnecessarily and looked around the slope frowning, as though considering whether to vanish back into the forests, then poked a finger at Perrin. Look here. I always knew you were more than a stray, and putting what the wolves told me together with you just happening to be heading toward this prophet fellow, I thought maybe you could use a friend to watch your back. Of course, the wolves didn't mention you were leading those pretty Mayenner Lancers. Neither did Gaul till we saw them. If you'd like me to stay, I will. If not, there's plenty of the world I haven't seen yet. I can always use another friend, Elias. Could Fail really want him to shout? He'd always known he might hurt somebody if he was not careful, and he always tried to keep a tight rein on his temper. Words could hurt as hard as fists. The wrong words, words you never meant, let loose in a temper. It had to be impossible. It just stood to reason. No woman would stand for that, from her husband or any man. A bluefinch's call brought Perrin's head up, ears pricking. It was just at the edge of hearing, even for him. But a moment later, the trill was repeated closer, then again, nearer still. Elias cocked an eyebrow at him. He would know the call of a borderland bird. Perrin had learned it from some Shinarans, Massima among them, and taught the Two Rivers men. We have visitors coming, he told Elias. They came quickly. 4 riders at a fast canter, arriving before he and Elias reached the bottom of the hill. Berlane led the way, splashing across the stream with Anura and Galien close behind, and a woman in a pale, hooded dust cloak at her side. They swept right by the Mayenner camp without a glance, not drawing rein until they were in front of the red and white striped tent. Some of the Carianan servants rushed to take bridles and hold stirrups, and Berlane and her companions were inside before the dust of their arrival settled. All in all, the arrival created quite a stir. A buzz rose among the Two Rivers men that Perrin could only call anticipatory. The inevitable gathering of Fail's young fools scratched their heads and stared at the tent, chattering excitedly among themselves. Grady and Neild watched the tent through the
Alright, everyone, I'm gonna call into this live for tonight. But I want to thank everyone for stopping by, and everyone keeps stopping by. Excuse me. But I want to thank everyone for stopping by and appreciate all y'all's support. Until next time, everyone, y'all stay safe.